This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still check my bedroom windows 3 times every night. I'm not exaggerating when I say that January of 2008 permanently changed me. It's been 15 years, and sometimes I wake up sweating, thinking I hear my name being called outside. I know I'm not the only one in Dryden who feels this way. Let me start by saying I've been a police officer in this small coastal town for almost 20 years now. Back then, I was Officer Sarah Kinney, 3 years on the force and still trying to prove myself. I was working the graveyard shift that winter, midnight to 8 a.m. Dryden's the kind of place where the overnight shift usually means breaking up the occasional bar fight or catching teenagers drinking by the pier. Nothing serious. That changed on January 11th. It was around 4:30 in the morning. The temperature had dropped to something like 15 degrees, and I was counting down the hours until I could go home and crawl under my electric blanket. I remember I was parked behind the old pharmacy, sipping lukewarm coffee from my thermos, when the call came through dispatch. Officer Kinney, we've got a distress call from 78 Maple Street. Elderly female reporting someone trying to enter her home. I knew the address immediately. Eleanor Walsh, a retired school teacher who taught half the town at some point, including me in 3rd grade. She was 78 and lived alone since her husband passed 5 years earlier. When I pulled up to her house, all the lights were on. Not a good sign at 4:30 in the morning. Eleanor answered the door in her robe, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock the deadbolt. I'd never seen fear like that on someone's face before. "He knew my name," she kept saying as I guided her to her living room sofa. He was outside calling Eleanor, Eleanor over and over. I asked her to slow down and tell me exactly what happened. She'd been asleep when something woke her, a noise at the back of the house. At first she thought it was just the wind or maybe a branch hitting the window. Then she heard it, a man's voice, soft but clear, calling Eleanor repeatedly from outside her bedroom window. It wasn't threatening, she explained, which somehow made it worse. It was gentle, almost like he was trying to wake me without startling me, like he knew me. She froze in bed, afraid to move. Then she heard the back door handle jiggling. That's when she called 911. I did a thorough check of the property. The snow had stopped falling around midnight, which meant any tracks would be fresh. There was a single set of footprints leading from her back door through her yard and into the woods that bordered her property. Medium-sized prints, probably a man's. The back door showed slight marks around the lock, like someone had been testing it. I called for backup, and we searched the woods for about half a mile in each direction. Nothing. Whoever it was had vanished. When I returned, Eleanor was calmer but still visibly shaken. "I've never been scared in this house before," she said. "Not in 30 years. I told her what most officers would, that it was probably some teenager pulling a prank, that she should keep her doors locked, that I'd increase patrols in her neighborhood. But something felt off. Why would someone call her by name? How would they even know which bedroom window was hers? 3 nights later, it happened again. Different victim, same scenario. Martin Gould, 82 years old, living alone since his wife moved to a nursing home. He reported waking up around 3 in the morning to someone softly calling Martin from outside his house. When he got up to look, he saw a figure standing in his backyard. The person disappeared when Martin turned on his porch light. By the end of the week, we had 3 more reports, all elderly residents living alone, all waking to someone calling their name in the early morning hours, all reporting that the voice sounded calm or gentle, not threatening, but somehow more terrifying because of that. My sergeant thought it might be a group of teens with a sick idea of fun. I wasn't convinced. The pattern was too specific, too targeted. Why only elderly people living alone? Why call their names? I couldn't shake the feeling we were missing something obvious. On my days off, I started looking deeper into the victims. There had to be a connection. They lived in different neighborhoods, belonged to different churches, shopped at different stores. The only common thread I could find was that all 5 had recently been to Dryden Regional Medical Center for various health issues in the past 2 months. That seemed too generic at first. In a town our size with an aging population, the hospital sees most elderly residents regularly. But something made me dig deeper. I pulled their hospital records. Being a police officer in a small town sometimes bends privacy rules when there's a potential threat. All 5 had been admitted as inpatients. All 5 had stayed on the 3rd floor, general medical, and looking at their admission dates, all 5 had been there during overlapping periods. I started interviewing hospital staff, showing photos of the victims, asking if anyone remembered these specific patients. Most didn't. They see too many faces every day. But when I spoke to the 3rd floor nursing supervisor, she mentioned that all general medical patients during the overnight shift would have been under the care of the same few nurses. "Who works nights most consistently?" I asked. "That would be Gabriel Watts," she replied. "He's been here about 8 months, requested the night shift specifically, very dedicated." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I asked to see his employment file. The supervisor was hesitant until I explained the situation. What I found sent ice through my veins. Gabriel Watts, 34, had worked at 3 different hospitals in 3 different states over the past 4 years, never staying longer than a year anywhere, always requesting night shifts. I ran a background check, no criminal record, but when I contacted police departments in the towns where he'd previously worked, a pattern emerged. Each town had reports of elderly residents hearing someone calling their names at night. The reports stopped when Watts moved away. This couldn't be coincidence. I brought my findings to my sergeant, who agreed it was suspicious enough to investigate further. We obtained a warrant for Watts' apartment. What we found still haunts me. A notebook, black cover, spiral bound. Inside were names and addresses, dozens of them, including all 5 of our victims. Next to each name were notes, detailed clinical observations about their living situations, their physical limitations, their medications, whether they lived alone, whether they had regular visitors. Eleanor Walsh, 78, Maple Saint, lives alone, arthritis in hands, difficulty with locks, no regular visitors. Bedroom window faces backyard, bedtime approximately 10 p.m. There were photos too, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Eleanor gardening, Martin getting his mail, all the victims going about their daily lives, unaware they were being watched. We arrested Watts at the hospital that night in the middle of his shift. He didn't resist, didn't even seem surprised, just looked at me with this empty expression and asked if he could get his coat before we left. The full horror of what he'd been planning only became clear during interrogation. Watts had been using his position as a night nurse to identify vulnerable targets. He memorized their personal information from their charts, learned their routines, their medications, their allergies. Then, weeks after they'd been discharged, he would visit their homes in the middle of the night. I called their names to see if they were alone and awake, he explained with a calmness that made my blood run cold. If they were too frail to check, or if they thought they were dreaming, I'd try the door. Most elderly people are on sleeping pills or pain medications. They're confused when they wake up, easy to manipulate. His goal was to enter homes where residents were too weak or disoriented to resist and administer fatal doses of medications he'd stolen from the hospital, medications that would mimic natural deaths in elderly patients. The most disturbing part was his explanation for calling their names. I wanted to see if they recognized my voice from the hospital. If they did, they'd feel safe opening the door. People trust their nurses. We later discovered that Watts had successfully killed 7 elderly patients in his previous locations. Deaths that had been attributed to natural causes, heart failures, strokes. Nothing suspicious for people in their 70s and 80s. The investigation expanded to include police departments and medical examiners from 3 states. Ultimately, Gabriel Watts received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The case prompted hospitals nationwide to implement stricter protocols regarding patient information and background checks for medical staff. But for those of us in Dryden, especially the 5 people who heard their names called in the darkness, the damage was done. Eleanor Walsh sold her house and moved in with her daughter in Portland. Martin Gould installed the most sophisticated security system he could afford. The others similarly changed their lives in response to that violation of their safety. As for me, I'm a sergeant now. I still work in Dryden. I still drive by Eleanor's old house sometimes, even though new people live there. I still check my own locks multiple times every night, even though Watts is locked away forever. Because the most terrifying part, if Eleanor hadn't called 911 that night, if she'd convinced herself she was just hearing things, or if she'd been too afraid to call, I know Watts would have eventually gotten in, and no one would have questioned why an elderly woman living alone had passed away in her sleep. Sometimes I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, thinking I hear someone softly calling my name from outside. It's never real, but the fear is. Story 2. I've been a trucker for 27 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things on the road. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, compares to what happened to me on December 12, 2017. I've never shared this publicly before, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm not crazy after all. My name is Dale Morrison. I was 52 when it happened, driving for Pacific Northwest Transport. It was supposed to be a routine haul, computer components from Sacramento to Seattle. I'd done this run hundreds of times before, nothing special. Just another night on I-5. That night started like any other. I checked my cargo, signed all the paperwork, and hit the road around 8 p.m. The weather was crappy, that typical Northern California winter drizzle that makes everything foggy and miserable, but nothing I couldn't handle. I remember stopping for coffee at my usual spot just outside Redding, chatting with a few other drivers. Normal stuff. What I didn't tell those guys was how on edge I'd been the past few weeks. I'd been experiencing weird things on my night runs. My truck's electronics would go haywire for no reason, lights flickering, dashboard going dark for a second or two. My radio would cut out and pick up these strange voices. Not truckers, not even English, I don't think. Just whispers, fragments of words that made no sense. Twice, I clearly remember both times, I saw lights following me, not headlights. These were blue-white, hovering above the highway, keeping pace with my rig. Both times they disappeared when I slowed down or tried to get a better look. I told myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. 27 years on the road, you learn to deal with sleep deprivation. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then there was the cargo issue. Twice in the month before December 12th, I'd opened my trailer to find things rearranged. Nothing missing, nothing damaged, just not how I'd loaded them. The seals were intact both times, which was impossible. I started taking photos of the seals and cargo before and after each trip. My dispatcher thought I was being paranoid. Maybe I was, but I needed to be sure. Anyway, back to that night. I was making good time despite the weather. Around 11:30 p.m., I hit that desolate stretch of I-5 in Northern California around mile marker 680. Not much out there except trees and darkness. The rain had finally stopped, but there was this weird mist forming in patches along the road. The first thing I noticed was my truck's electrical system acting up. The headlights dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. My dashboard lights flickered. My CB crackled with static. I remember checking my watch, 11:47 p.m. I tried calling in to dispatch using the hands-free system, but all I got was this high-pitched whine that made my teeth hurt. Then my truck started losing power, just draining away like something was sucking the energy right out of it. I managed to pull over around mile marker 687, hit the hazards, and shut down the engine. I figured maybe it was an alternator problem or something with the battery. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and was about to step out when I saw it. The mist. It wasn't everywhere now, just around my truck. Bluish white, like those lights I'd seen before, but thicker, dense, and it seemed to pulse. That sounds crazy, but it's the only way to describe it, like it was breathing. I remember thinking, this isn't fog, this isn't natural. I tried starting the truck again. Nothing. Dead. I reached for my phone, also dead, even though I'd charged it at that coffee stop. My flashlight flickered, then went out too. That's when the panic started creeping in. I've been in plenty of tight spots before, breakdowns and blizzards, close calls with drunk drivers, you name it. But this was different. This felt deliberate. The temperature inside the cab dropped suddenly. I could see my breath. In California, in a truck with a heater that had been running 5 minutes earlier. I remember checking the seals on my logbook, force of habit, I guess, and saying out loud, that's not possible. The seals are intact. Because they were. Whatever was happening, it wasn't about the cargo. Then came the silence. Not just quiet, but the complete absence of sound. No distant traffic, no wind, no hum from the truck. Nothing. Like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. I felt pressure in my ears, like being underwater. The mist outside got thicker, swirling around the truck now. And then, I swear this happened, it started seeping in through the vents, through the seams around the doors and windows, not like normal fog. This moved with purpose, like fingers reaching in. The cab filled with this cold, electric-smelling haze. My hands-free system suddenly came to life, but it wasn't playing music or connecting a call. It was recording. The little red light was on. I hadn't touched it. I remember saying something about the seals again, trying to make sense of things. That's when I saw the silhouette, standing or floating just behind my seat, in my mirror, where nothing should be, where nobody could possibly be. A shape darker than the darkness around it, not quite human, too tall, too thin, no features I could make out, just this black cutout against the blue-white mist. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could barely breathe. I managed to say, "Who are you? How did you get in the—" And then nothing. The recording stopped. My memory stops there too. The next thing I remember is complicated. I was standing in a clearing in the forest. 3 miles from my truck, I later found out. It was still dark, but different. Not night anymore, but not quite morning either. That in-between time that doesn't feel real. I had no idea how I got there. No recollection of walking, no scratches or tears on my clothes that would suggest I'd hiked through 3 miles of forest at night. I just appeared there, standing in front of a perfectly flat rock. I remember taking off my company ID badge and placing it on that rock, though I have no idea why. It felt important, necessary, like leaving a marker. Then I started walking, not toward the highway, but deeper into the forest. I walked for what felt like hours, though the sky never got lighter. Eventually, I found myself on a service road, and a forestry worker found me around dawn. I couldn't tell him what happened, couldn't explain why I'd abandoned my truck, couldn't explain the 18 hours that were missing from my life. The investigation afterward was a nightmare. Pacific Northwest Transport was surprisingly understanding, but the questions were endless. Police, insurance investigators, even some government types who never identified which agency they were from. They found my truck right where I'd left it, hazards still flashing, everything inside untouched, my logbook, my thermos, even my phone. The truck's systems showed a massive power drain right before I disappeared, but nobody could explain why. Other drivers reported weird stuff from that night. Eileen, a driver I've known for years, saw those same blue-white lights I'd been seeing. Marcus said his CB went crazy with static and backward voices. Kevin passed by my truck not long after. Whatever happened, and he saw that same blue mist surrounding just my vehicle. The company tried putting my truck back in service after a thorough inspection, but the electrical problems continued. Random power drains, navigation systems failing. Eventually, they sold it off. 6 months later, a forestry worker found my ID badge, still sitting on that rock where I'd left it, looking brand new despite months of exposure to the elements. That's when Pacific Northwest Transport implemented their new policy. No solo night driving through that stretch of I-5. They even put up a little memorial marker near mile marker 687, though nobody died there. At least, I don't think I did. The truckers call it the vanishing mile now. Nobody stops there at night. Nobody talks on their CBs when passing through. It's like we all collectively decided to pretend it's just another stretch of highway during the day. But at night, it belongs to something else. I haven't driven a truck since. Can't bring myself to get back behind the wheel. My wife says I'm different now, quieter. I sleep with the lights on. I check the seals on our doors and windows every night. I still have dreams about that clearing in the forest, about the flat rock, about leaving something behind that was meant to be found. The thing that haunts me most, I think I was meant to disappear completely. Whatever happened that night, whatever took me, I wasn't supposed to come back. Sometimes I wonder if the real Dale Morrison never did. Story 3. I've been trying to write this down for months now, but every time I start, I feel nauseous and my hands shake so badly I can't type. I don't know if sharing this will help me or make things worse, but I need someone to know what's happening in Thornwood. I can't keep this to myself anymore. I'm Dr. James Weber, an epidemiologist who specializes in community health patterns. Last year, I received a research grant to study unusual health outcomes in rural communities, and that's how Thornwood came onto my radar. This small New England town had statistics that defied explanation. Cancer rates 78% below national average, virtually no heart disease, and an average lifespan of 92 years. No genetic factors, no special diet, nothing environmental could explain it. I arrived in Thornwood on February 1st. The town was exactly what you'd expect. Picturesque white church, town square with a gazebo, family-owned shops with clever names. Everyone was so damn friendly. Mayor Eleanor Richmond personally welcomed me, arranged my apartment above the old pharmacy, and introduced me to key community members. I got access to their medical records, anonymized of course, and began interviewing residents. 2 weeks into my stay, I noticed something odd. There were subtle preparations happening around town. Shopkeepers taking inventory, the pharmacy doubling prescriptions for certain residents, people storing extra food. When I asked about it casually at the diner, Martha, the waitress who always gave me extra bacon, just smiled and said, "Maintenance period's coming up. Town shuts down for a bit each year." That seemed reasonable enough. Small towns have their quirks. But then I overheard the nursing home director ordering medical restraints and sedatives, enough for every resident plus extra. That's when my researcher brain kicked into high gear. On February 22nd, I woke up to a completely different Thornwood. Closed for annual maintenance signs hung on every business. The streets were empty except for a few official-looking people directing the occasional lost tourist away from town. I noticed deliveries being made to the community center, boxes of medical supplies, monitoring equipment. It was all happening in plain sight, but with such casual efficiency that it seemed routine. I went to the town hall to find Mayor Richmond. Her assistant tried to stop me, but I pushed past him into her office. She was on the phone, and when she saw me, her friendly demeanor disappeared. She hung up and stared at me with this look I'll never forget. Not angry, but disappointed, like I was a child who'd broken a house rule. "Dr. Weber," she said, "today isn't a good day for questions. I suggest you return to your apartment and rest. We'll resume your research access next month." "What's happening tonight?" I asked. "Why is the nursing home getting restraints? Why is everyone acting like this is normal?" She sighed and pressed a button under her desk. "I hoped you'd be different. Most researchers don't notice, or if they do, they respect our privacy." 2 men entered. Tom from the hardware store and Bill, the high school principal. They stood behind me, blocking the door. "Thornwood protects its own," Mayor Richmond said, "and the covenant requires absolute participation. I'm sorry you had to see this part." I tried to leave, but Tom and Bill grabbed my arms. They were stronger than they looked. Mayor Richmond opened a drawer and took out a medical kit. "What's the covenant?" I asked, struggling against their grip. "What participation?" She prepared a syringe while explaining in the most matter-of-fact way. At midnight, everyone in Thornwood will enter a synchronized sleep state that lasts 13 days. During this time, our collective consciousness serves as sustenance for the benefactor who lives beneath us. In exchange, it continues to provide us with health and prosperity for another year. I thought she was delusional. I told her so. She just smiled sadly while approaching with the syringe. "You'll understand soon," she said. "Everyone does. It's been this way since 1788. I fought hard, but it was useless. The needle went in and everything went black. What I experienced next still doesn't make sense. I was in Thornwood, but not the real one. It was like a perfect replica where everyone performed their daily routines with mechanical precision. The sky had a strange quality, not quite right, like it was painted on. Time moved differently. Days passed in minutes, then would stretch endlessly. People smiled and talked, but their conversations looped. I'd hear the same exchanges, repeated. I tried talking to people, but they'd just incorporate me into their loops. "Lovely day, Dr. Weber. How's your research coming?" Over and over, regardless of what I said to them. I couldn't leave town. Every road I took somehow led back to the center. The woods at the edge of town simply repeated. I'd walk for hours only to find myself stepping out at the same spot. I tried breaking into homes, causing disruptions, anything to break the pattern, but nothing worked. Then I noticed the tendrils, dark, smoky appendages that would occasionally emerge from drains, cracks in the sidewalk, or cellar doors. People would pause when they appeared, their faces going blank. Something would pass between them and these tendrils, a subtle exchange I couldn't quite see. Afterward, the person would seem diminished somehow, like a light inside them had dimmed slightly. Time kept slipping. What felt like days became weeks, then months. I'd see the seasons change, holidays celebrated, all in this twisted reflection of Thornwood. I stopped trying to escape and started observing. The residents were offering something to these tendrils, memories, emotions, something intangible but vital. I lost track of time completely. It might have been years in that place. I started following the tendrils, tracing them back to their source. They all led to the town square, but I could never quite see what was beneath it. Something was hidden there, something vast and patient. Then came what felt like the fifth winter in this nightmare. The town gathered in the square for what appeared to be a celebration. Eleanor Hargrove, the oldest woman in town at 98, was led to the center by Mayor Richmond. They were dressed formally, and Eleanor looked peaceful, happy even. The pavement in the square receded like liquid, revealing a pit of absolute darkness. Not just absence of light, it was like a hole in reality itself. Eleanor walked toward it willingly as Mayor Richmond addressed. The crowd, "The vessel of flesh is always the eldest among us. Eleanor's sacrifice ensures prosperity until someone takes her place." Eleanor stepped into the darkness and disappeared. The pavement solidified again. Everyone applauded, then dispersed as if nothing unusual had happened. I woke up gasping in my apartment above the pharmacy. Sunlight streamed through the windows. My phone showed the date, March 7th. 13 days had passed. I ran outside. Thornwood was back to normal. People were shopping, chatting, going about their business. The maintenance period signs were gone. When I asked about it at the diner, Martha just said, "Oh, we do that every year, town tradition, deep cleaning and all that." The local paper had Eleanor Hargrove's obituary, passed peacefully in her sleep of natural causes. I checked death records going back as far as I could. Every year during the maintenance period, Thornwood lost its oldest citizen, always to natural causes. This pattern extended back to 1788. Exactly 230 citizens sacrificed, always during the dormancy period. I needed to get out to expose this. I packed my research and headed for my car. That's when I noticed something strange. My chronic cough was gone. I've had it since a bad case of pneumonia in grad school, but it was completely gone. The early arthritis in my knees that made climbing stairs painful, gone too. Even more disturbing, a small melanoma I'd had scheduled for removal was completely gone, not even a mark where it had been. I'd become a beneficiary of Thornwood's bargain. The moral weight of that realization kept me sitting in my car for hours, unable to drive away. I eventually left for Boston and tried to publish my findings. That's when the dreams started. I'd fall asleep randomly, violently, and find myself back in Dream Thornwood. Each time I tried to share what I knew, the dreams would come. After collapsing at a conference and spending 13 days in a coma, I destroyed all my research. I returned to Thornwood permanently last April. I don't fight it anymore. I understand the covenant now. I even help coordinate the maintenance period, assisting with arrangements for the eldest resident in their special room beneath Town Hall. My book on sustainable community practices in historical New England towns has received positive reviews. No one questions why I praise Thornwood's traditions so highly. Sometimes at night, I feel something watching me from the drain in my shower or from the small crack in my basement floor. I pretend not to notice, but I know it's there, waiting. I've started calculating how many outsiders we could incorporate before requiring a second sacrifice each year. The math works out surprisingly well. I don't expect you to believe me. I wouldn't believe it either. But if you ever drive through New England and see signs for Thornwood, keep driving. No matter how charming it looks, no matter how friendly the people seem, just keep driving. And if you start noticing your health improving for no reason after reading this, I'm so sorry. It means you've been noticed too. Story 4. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural before taking that job. I was just a broke law student looking for some easy night work where I could study while getting paid. That's what they promised me at Crestview Towers. Quiet nights, minimal interruptions, and a decent paycheck. Perfect for studying, the building manager Teresa had said during my interview. Most nights you won't see a soul. She had no idea how wrong she would be. Crestview Towers is this fancy high-rise apartment building downtown. 32 floors of luxury, living in what used to be the old Hargrove manufacturing building from the 1920s. The conversion happened about 10 years ago. They kept all the Art Deco details and some of the industrial elements, marketing it as historic luxury living. The rent starts at $3,000 a month for a studio. My job was simple. Work the front desk from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., monitor the security cameras, sign in any late-night visitors, and make hourly rounds through the common areas. I was given a walkie-talkie, a tablet for the camera feeds, and a massive ring of keys. I had access to every common area in the building except for the maintenance areas. Those were off-limits. The first 2 weeks were exactly as promised. Boring as hell, but perfect for studying. I'd set up my books at the marble front desk, review case law, and occasionally look up when someone came home late. Every hour I'd do my rounds, checking the gym, the rooftop garden, the mail room, and the parking garage. The residents were mostly wealthy professionals who barely acknowledged my existence. Then came the third week, and everything changed. It was a Tuesday night in October. Outside, a storm was raging, rain pounding against the massive windows in the lobby. I remember thinking how the rain made the security monitors harder to see because of the glare. Around 3 a.m., while I was deep in contract law readings, something caught my eye on one of the monitors. Movement in the service corridor. I looked closer. The feed showed the old freight elevator, a massive industrial thing from the building's factory days that was now used only by maintenance staff. According to Teresa, it was powered down at night to save energy, but the indicator light above it was on, showing it was at the 18th floor. I watched as the light changed to 19, then 20. The elevator was moving up. I checked the maintenance schedule on the computer. No one was supposed to be working tonight. I grabbed my walkie-talkie, but there was only static. The storm must have been interfering with the signal. I didn't want to leave the desk unattended, but this seemed like something I should check out. I took out my phone to call Teresa, but then remembered she'd given me another contact for emergencies, Simon, the head of maintenance. She'd said he lived in the building and could respond quickly to any issues. I called the number, and a gruff voice answered on the second ring. Yeah? Hi, this is Alex, the night security guard. Sorry to bother you so late, but the freight elevator is active and I don't see any scheduled maintenance. There was a long pause, then, I'll be right down. 5 minutes later, a man in his 60s appeared in the lobby. He wore faded work clothes and had deep lines around his eyes like he hadn't slept well in years. His grey hair was slicked back and he carried a battered toolbox. "Simon," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Where's it at now?" I checked the monitor. 28th floor and still going up. Simon's face tightened. He muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "Not again," and opened his toolbox. I expected to see wrenches and screwdrivers, but instead, he pulled out a cloth bag and a small metal container. "What's that?" I asked. "Just maintenance supplies," he said, but his tone made it clear he didn't want questions. I followed him to the service corridor. The freight elevator was ancient compared to the sleek passenger elevators. It had a metal gate that you had to pull across manually and exposed mechanical parts that looked original to the building. Simon opened the metal container. Inside was salt. He began pouring it in a line across the threshold of the elevator. "What are you doing?" I couldn't help asking. "Protection," he said curtly. "Stay behind this line, no matter what happens or what you hear. Understand?" Before I could answer, the indicator above the elevator lit up. It had reached the top floor and was now descending. Simon worked faster, muttering under his breath. From the cloth bag, he removed what looked like dried herbs and scattered them over the salt line. "Listen to me," Simon said, grabbing my arm. "If anything happens to me, go to apartment 1851. Tell him Simon sent you." His grip was ice cold. The elevator indicator showed it was approaching our floor. Simon pushed me back, then stepped over his salt line and into the elevator. He pulled the gate shut just as the car arrived with a mechanical groan that didn't sound right at all. The doors opened and Simon disappeared inside. The elevator descended again, the indicator lights tracking its path down to the basement levels where the old manufacturing floor used to be. I waited in that hallway for 30 minutes. The elevator never came back up. Eventually, I returned to the desk, shaken. I tried calling Simon's number again, but it went straight to voicemail. The next morning, I mentioned the incident to the day guard who relieved me. He just shrugged and said the old building had electrical issues sometimes. When I asked about Simon, he looked confused. "Who? There's no maintenance guy named Simon. Head of maintenance is a guy named Jeff." I was too exhausted to argue. I went home, slept fitfully through the day, and woke up determined to figure out what the hell was going on. That evening before my shift, I went to the local library and looked up the history of the Hargrove manufacturing building. It took some digging, but I found it. A newspaper article from 1951 about a catastrophic accident. 7 dead in elevator disaster at Hargrove Manufacturing, the headline screamed. According to the article, a freight elevator's cables had snapped while carrying 7 workers down from the 18th floor. They'd plummeted to their deaths. There was a grainy photo of the factory floor after the accident. In the corner of the image, a man stood looking at the camera. The caption identified him as Foreman Simon Hargrove Jr. He looked exactly like the Simon I'd met last night, down to the slicked back hair and tired eyes. My hands were shaking as I drove to work that evening. I arrived early and sought out Teresa in her office. "I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's Simon from maintenance?" Teresa looked up from her computer. "We don't have anyone named Simon on staff. Are you feeling all right, Alex? But you gave me his number for emergencies. He came down last night when the freight elevator was acting up." Teresa's expression changed from confusion to concern. "I gave you Jeff's number. The freight elevator is decommissioned at night. It can't move unless someone overrides the system." She pulled up the staff directory on her computer and turned the screen toward me. "No Simon." "What about apartment 1851? I asked. "That's Mr. Hargrove's apartment. Sweet old man keeps to himself. His family owned the building before the conversion. She narrowed her eyes. Why are you asking about him? I mumbled something about a package delivery and left her office. That night, I couldn't focus on my studies. Every few minutes I checked the monitor showing the freight elevator. Nothing happened until exactly 3 a.m., just like before. The indicator light came on. The elevator was at the basement and it was coming up. This time, I didn't hesitate. I locked the front desk and headed for the 18th floor. Apartment 1851 was at the end of a long hallway, far from the other units. I knocked, not really expecting an answer at this hour, but the door opened almost immediately. An elderly man stood there, well into his 80s, with the same eyes as the Simon I'd met. "I've been expecting you," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "You're the new night guard." The apartment was like stepping back in time. Antique furniture, old photographs on the walls, and a view of the city that must have cost a fortune. On the mantelpiece was a photo of 3 men who looked nearly identical, just at different ages. "I'm Simon Hargrove III, the old man said, following my gaze to the photo. "My grandfather founded this building. My father died here." "In the elevator accident," I said, "in 1951. He nodded slowly. "So you know some of it. What did you see last night?" I told him everything. The moving elevator, the Simon who came to help, the salt line, his disappearance. The old man sighed deeply. "My father never left this building. Not really. He was the foreman when the cables snapped. He always blamed himself for not inspecting them properly that day. But the man I saw was my father's spirit, still trying to save those men. Every year, on the anniversary of the accident, the elevator runs its course again. But it's been getting more frequent. The renovations must have disturbed something." A chill ran down my spine. "Today isn't the anniversary." "No," he said gravely, "and that's what worries me. Something's changed in the cycle." As if on cue, the building's lights flickered. Simon III went to a cabinet and took out a small brass key, ancient and ornate. "This was my father's master key to the building. It might help you break the cycle." He pressed it into my palm. "They're trapped, you see, all 8 of them, including my father. They've been falling for 70 years. The lights flickered again, and the building groaned like it was in pain. "Go," he urged. "The freight elevator. Use the key on the control panel. There's a lock that nobody knows about anymore." I ran down the hallway to the service corridor. The freight elevator was there, gate open, waiting. No salt line this time. Inside, the control panel had dozens of buttons for different floors, but in the corner was a keyhole, tarnished with age. I inserted the brass key and turned it. The elevator plunged downward with such force that I was thrown against the back wall. The lights went out, and the falling sensation seemed to last forever. I was certain I was going to die. Then, suddenly, the elevator stopped. The gates opened automatically. I wasn't in Crestview Towers anymore. I was standing on a manufacturing floor from the 1950s. Massive machines hummed, and men in work clothes moved around, oblivious to my presence. Through the industrial windows, I could see it was daytime. And there he was, Simon Hargrove Jr., checking a clipboard, looking exactly like the man I'd met. Near him, 7 workers were loading crates onto the freight elevator. "All set, Mr. Hargrove," one called out. Simon nodded, still reviewing his clipboard. The men entered the elevator and the gate closed behind them. I knew what was about to happen. I tried to shout, to warn them, but no sound came out. I was like a ghost here, unable to interact. Then Simon looked up directly at me. His eyes widened in recognition. "You came," he said, somehow hearing me when no one else could. "Use the key, now." I fumbled with the brass key, still in the lock from my time. As I turned it again, I heard the horrible sound of cables snapping. Screams filled the air as the elevator began to fall. Then everything froze. The falling elevator, the screaming men, even the dust particles in the air, all suspended in time. Simon walked over to the elevator shaft and looked down. "It's time to let go," he said, not to me, but to the men inside. "We don't have to keep falling." The frozen scene began to shimmer like a mirage. The 7 workers appeared beside us, no longer in the elevator, their forms translucent. "Thank you," one said to me. 70 years is a long time to fall." Simon turned to me. "You've broken the loop. We can move on now." He joined the others, and they all began to fade, their expressions peaceful for the first time. "The key," Simon said as he disappeared. "Return it to my son." The manufacturing floor dissolved around me. I was back in the freight elevator at Crestview Towers. The gate was open, showing the lobby. The indicator light was off. My hands were empty. The brass key was gone. I staggered back to the front desk, my mind reeling. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I went straight to the 18th floor. Apartment 1851 had a "under renovation" sign on the door. I asked a passing maintenance worker about it. "Oh, that's been empty for years," he said. "Old Mr. Hargrove died back in 2014. Management's finally getting around to renovating it." I quit that day. Teresa seemed to understand, though I didn't explain why. As I handed in my keys and badge, she mentioned something odd. "You know, the freight elevator's been running smoother than ever. Jeff said it's like someone finally fixed something that had been broken for decades." I nodded and left Crestview Towers behind. Sometimes I drive past it at night and look up at the 18th floor. I never see any lights on in apartment 1851, but sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can see 8 figures standing at the window, looking out at the city they're no longer trapped in. And the freight elevator, it never malfunctions anymore. The fall has finally ended. Story 5. I still can't sleep right. It's been 2 weeks since that night, and I find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if what happened was real. I've been a police officer in Oak Ridge for 5 years now. It's a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business, and the biggest excitement is usually the high school football game on Friday nights. I'm used to dealing with drunk drivers, petty theft, and the occasional domestic disturbance. Nothing that prepared me for what happened at the old Whitaker house. That Friday started like any other shift. It had been raining all day, one of those constant, dreary downpours that makes everything feel heavy. I was looking forward to going home, making some hot chocolate, and binge-watching something mindless. Around 11:30, just when I thought I might actually get off on time, the call came in. "Officer Mitchell, we've got a report of strange noises coming from the abandoned house on Mulberry Lane. Caller says they heard music and saw lights flickering in the windows." I remember sighing. The Whitaker house had been abandoned for at least 20 years. Local kids were always breaking in on dares, especially around Halloween. But this was April, and something about dispatch's tone made me uneasy. "I'm on my way," I said, turning my cruiser around and heading toward the outskirts of town. The rain was coming down harder as I drove, drumming against the roof of my car. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up, making everything outside look blurry and distorted. My headlights cut through the darkness, but they didn't do much to comfort me as I turned onto Mulberry Lane. It's a narrow road that winds through a patch of woods before opening up to a clearing where the Whitaker house stands. I'd driven past it dozens of times, but had never been inside. The place had a reputation. People said old Mrs. Whitaker died there alone, and that her spirit still wandered the halls. I never put much stock in ghost stories until that night. As I pulled up to the house, my headlights illuminated the facade. It was a Victorian-style home, once grand but now crumbling under years of neglect. The paint was peeling, shutters hung at odd angles, and the porch sagged like it might collapse at any moment. But what caught my attention was a faint light flickering in an upstairs window. I radioed in my position and grabbed my flashlight and gun. Standard procedure, even though I assumed I was just dealing with teenagers. The rain soaked through my uniform as I approached the house, and I remember thinking how much I hated working in wet socks. The front door was slightly ajar. I called out, "Police officer, anyone inside?" My voice sounded small against the patter of rain on the roof. No answer. I pushed the door open wider, and it creaked like something from a bad horror movie. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a grand foyer with a staircase that curved up to the second floor. The air inside was stale and thick with dust. It smelled old, like yellowed papers and forgotten things. "This is the police. If anyone is here, make yourself known," I called out again, moving my flashlight around the room. Nothing looked disturbed, no beer cans or cigarette butts that would indicate teenagers had been there recently. The layer of dust on the floor was undisturbed except for my own wet footprints. That's when I heard it, a soft, haunting melody coming from upstairs. It was faint but unmistakable. Piano music, slow and melancholy. My first thought was that someone had brought a portable speaker, but the music didn't have that digital quality. It sounded real, like someone was actually playing a piano somewhere in the house. I started up the stairs, keeping my hand on my gun. Each step creaked under my weight, and I found myself walking lighter, trying to make less noise. The music grew louder as I reached the second floor. The hallway stretched before me, lined with closed doors on either side. The music was coming from the end of the hall. As I moved toward it, the floorboards creaking beneath me, I noticed the temperature dropping. My breath began to fog in front of my face, even though it was April and not nearly cold enough for that. I reached the last door, which was partially open. The music was definitely coming from inside. I pushed the door open slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was some kind of parlor or music room. Heavy curtains hung over the windows. A faded settee sat against one wall, and in the center of the room was a grand piano. It was covered in dust like everything else, except for the keys, which were moving on their own, playing that haunting melody without anyone touching them. I froze. The rational part of my brain tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was one of those old player pianos? But I knew it wasn't. This was something else entirely. I must have made some sound because suddenly the music stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I swept my flashlight around the room, but there was no one there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. I approached the piano cautiously. It looked ancient, its wood dull with age. I reached out and touched one of the keys. It made a soft, clear note that seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. That's when I felt it, a cold spot behind me, like someone had opened a freezer door at my back. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I just knew someone was standing behind me. I turned around slowly, my flashlight beam shaking slightly in my hand. She was there, a young woman in a white dress that seemed to shimmer slightly in the darkness. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style from another era, and her face was pale and gaunt. But it was her eyes that got me, hollow and full of a sadness so deep it made my chest ache just looking at her. I didn't scream, I didn't run. Something about her kept me rooted to the spot. She wasn't threatening, she was waiting. "Can you see me?" Her voice was like a whisper, but I heard it clearly even though her lips didn't seem to move. I nodded, unable to find my voice. "No one has seen me for so long," she said, her form flickering slightly like a bad TV signal. I finally found my voice. "Who are you?" "Elizabeth Whitaker." She moved closer, and the air around me grew colder. "I've been here since 1929, playing and playing, but never finishing." "Finishing what?" I asked, my mind racing. Was I really talking to a ghost? Was I hallucinating? Had I hit my head somehow? "My last song," she said, gesturing to the piano. "I was composing it the night I died. Influenza. It came on so suddenly. I never got to finish it, and now I'm bound here until the music stops." I looked at the piano, then back at her. "I don't understand." Her expression shifted to something like hope. "You can help me. You can play it. Finish it for me." I almost laughed. "I don't play the piano. I never learned." "You don't need to know," she said, moving toward the piano. "The music will flow through you. Please, I've been waiting so long." I should have called for backup. I should have left. But something in her eyes made me stay. I sat down at the piano bench, dust puffing up around me. "What do I do?" I asked. "Just place your hands on the keys," she said, her voice taking on an urgency. "Feel the music." I felt ridiculous, but I placed my hands on the yellowed keys. They were cold under my fingers. Nothing happened at first, and I was about to stand up when I felt it, a tingling sensation running up my arms. My fingers began to move on their own, pressing keys in a sequence I couldn't have planned if I tried. Music filled the room. The same melancholy tune I'd heard before, but now it was changing, evolving. It grew more complex, more emotional. I wasn't playing it. It was playing through me. I could feel Elizabeth beside me, her presence growing stronger as the music built. The melody shifted from sorrow to something else, hope, maybe, or acceptance. I couldn't take my eyes off my hands as they moved across the keys with a skill I didn't possess. The room seemed to be changing around us. The dust and decay faded away, and for a moment I saw the room as it must have been, vibrant and alive with color, the curtains new and the wood gleaming. The music built to a crescendo, and I felt tears streaming down my face, though I didn't know why. With one final chord, my hands came to rest, and silence fell over the room. When I looked up, Elizabeth was transformed. The hollow sadness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a peaceful light. Her form was brighter, more solid somehow. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice sounded clearer now. "It's finished now. I can go." She began to fade, not like she was disappearing, but like she was becoming part of the light that now seemed to fill the room. Before she vanished completely, she pointed to the wall beside the door. After she was gone, I sat there for I don't know how long, trying to process what had happened. Eventually, I got up on shaky legs and went to where she had pointed. Hanging on the wall was a framed photograph, so covered in dust and cobwebs that I hadn't noticed it before. I wiped it clean with my sleeve. It was a family portrait from the 20s, a stern-looking man, a woman, and a young woman I recognized immediately. Elizabeth. She was smiling in the photo, her eyes bright and full of life, so different from the hollow gaze I'd seen. Below the photo was a small brass plaque, "The Whittaker Family, 1927. I took one last look around the room. The piano sat silent, covered in dust again. The brief glimpse of the room's former glory was gone, but the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. I made my way back downstairs and out to my cruiser. The rain had stopped and the night was quiet. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to figure out what to put in my report. In the end, I wrote that I had investigated a noise complaint and found no one in the house. What else could I say? I've driven past the Whittaker house several times since that night. It still looks abandoned and decrepit from the outside, but it feels different now. Not haunted, just empty. Sometimes I think about going back inside, but I haven't worked up the courage yet. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Most days I'm not sure I believe it myself, but on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I swear I can still feel the music flowing through my fingers, and I know what happened was real. Whatever was keeping Elizabeth Whittaker bound to that house is gone now. She found her way home. And me? I'm still trying to make sense of a world that's bigger and stranger than I ever imagined. Story 6. I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 15 years now, and I've seen some weird stuff out on the road. Sleep deprivation plays tricks on your mind, and the monotony of endless highways can make you start seeing things that aren't there. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. What happened to me 3 months ago on Interstate 40 changed everything I thought I knew about this world. I still can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to. But I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive, and maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. It was a Thursday night in late October. I was hauling a shipment of electronics from Nashville to Albuquerque, a route I'd driven dozens of times before. The weather forecast had promised clear skies, which was a relief because I was already behind schedule after my truck needed some unexpected maintenance earlier that day. I remember checking the time as I pulled out of the service station just outside of Nashville, 11:15 at night. Not ideal, but I figured I could make up some time overnight when traffic was lighter. I had my thermos full of coffee, some energy drinks in the cooler, and my playlist of podcasts to keep me company. About 3 hours into the drive, somewhere in the western part of Tennessee, I started feeling off. Not tired, not sick, just this weird knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Like when you know something bad is about to happen, but can't put your finger on it. I turned up the radio to distract myself. The station was playing one of those late-night talk shows where people call in with their weird stories. Normally I avoid that stuff. It just makes me jumpy on dark drives. But this night, for some reason, I kept listening. The host was talking about highway hauntings, ghost hitchhikers, phantom vehicles, all that classic creepy road stuff. I should have changed the channel right then and there. One caller came on talking about a woman in white who supposedly haunted stretches of Interstate 40, said his buddy had seen her standing on the side of the road near Memphis, just staring at passing trucks. The host ate it up, of course, asking for more details, speculating that she might be the ghost of someone who died in a highway accident. I remember rolling my eyes and thinking about changing the station when my headlights swept across something up ahead, a figure on the shoulder of the road. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe some debris, but as I got closer, I could clearly see it was a person. A woman, standing with her arm out, thumb up in the universal hitchhiker signal. She was wearing what looked like a white dress, billowing slightly in the breeze. Now, I don't pick up hitchhikers. Company policy forbids it, insurance won't cover it, and honestly, it's just not safe these days. But something about this woman made me slow down. Maybe it was how isolated this stretch of highway was, or maybe it was the weird coincidence after just hearing that ghost story. Whatever it was, I found myself pulling over, the gravel crunching under my tires as I eased onto the shoulder about 20 yards ahead of her. Through my side mirror, I watched her walk toward my truck. There was something graceful but unsettling about the way she moved. Her dress, which I could now see was more like a simple white sundress, seemed too light for the October chill. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. Common sense was screaming at me to pull away, but before I could, she was at my passenger door. I rolled down the window just a crack. "Thank you for stopping," she said, her voice surprisingly normal and calm. "I just need a ride to the next town. My car broke down a few miles back and my phone's dead." I hesitated, scanning the road behind her. "Where's your car?" "Around the bend." She gestured vaguely behind her. "I've been walking for about an hour. Please, I'm freezing out here." Against every instinct and rule I've followed for years on the road, I unlocked the door. "I can take you to the next exit with services," I said. "There should be a truck stop about 20 miles up." She climbed in, thanking me again. Up close, she looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s, pretty in an ordinary way, with no makeup that I could see. Nothing particularly ghostly or threatening about her. "I'm Emily," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "Jason," I replied, pulling back onto the highway. The cab felt colder with her in it. I adjusted the heater, thinking the open door had let in too much night air. "So what happened to your car?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Just stopped running," she said, looking out the window. "1 minute fine, the next completely dead, like it just gave up." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. "Happens sometimes. Alternator maybe, or electrical system." She didn't respond, just kept staring out the window into the darkness. The silence grew uncomfortable. I reached to turn up the radio, which was still playing that same talk show. The host was now taking another call about highway phenomena. "And then my grandfather told me never to stop for her," the caller was saying. "Said that woman in white has been seen on Interstate 40 for decades. Story goes she was killed by a truck back in the 80s, hit and run. Driver never stopped to help her, and now she tries to get rides from trucks, especially at night. I felt the blood drain from my face. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. I glanced over at Emily, who was still looking out the window, seemingly oblivious to the radio. That's quite a story, I said, turning the volume down slightly. A lot of those ghost hitchhiker legends out there. Emily turned to me then, her face unreadable in the dim glow from the dashboard. People believe what they want to believe, she said, simply. I noticed the temperature gauge on my dash was dropping, despite the heater being on full blast. My breath was starting to fog in front of me. Outside, a mist was rolling in across the highway, unusual for this area and time of year. Weather report didn't mention fog, I muttered, more to myself than to her. It comes and goes around here, Emily replied. Are you cold? I'm always cold. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road ahead, which was getting harder to see as the fog thickened. The radio crackled with static, then cleared again. The host was still going on about the woman in white. Some say she's looking for the driver who killed her, he said. Others think she's just trying to get home. But all the stories agree. If you pick her up, strange things start happening. Electronics malfunction, fog appears from nowhere, and sometimes other spirits show up too. Just as he said that, my truck's lights flickered. Once, twice, then back to normal. I glanced at Emily again, but she seemed lost in thought, staring at something in the distance I couldn't see. You're not her, are you? I asked, trying to make it sound like a joke, but my voice cracked. Emily looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed how pale her skin was, almost luminous in the dashboard lights. Her? The woman from the radio? She smiled faintly. No, I'm just trying to get to the next town. I nodded, not entirely convinced. The fog was getting even thicker now, and I had to slow down to 45 miles per hour. The visibility was terrible. I could barely see 20 feet ahead. Other vehicles had disappeared. I hadn't seen headlights or taillights for miles. Then I noticed something weird. The mile markers were wrong. We should have been approaching exit 79, but the last marker I saw said 63. Either I'd lost track or something very strange was happening with the distance. Should be coming up on that truck stop soon, I said, more to reassure myself than anything. Not yet, Emily said quietly. We're not there yet. The radio changed to static again, louder this time. Through the noise, I could barely make out the host's voice. Reports coming in of another sighting tonight. Be careful out there. Don't pick up hitchhikers. I reached to turn it off, but before I could, something white appeared in my headlights. Another woman in a white dress standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the wet asphalt. Emily didn't scream or grab the dashboard like a normal person would. She just stared ahead at the figure who looked impossibly exactly like her. What the hell? I gasped as the truck came to a stop just feet from the woman. But when I looked again, she was gone, vanished completely. The radio went silent. The fog pressed against the windows like it was trying to get in. And Emily changed. You have to help me, she said, her voice different now, urgent, desperate. I can't stay out here. I'm trapped. What are you talking about? I asked, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Who are you really? I've been trying to get home for so long, she whispered. Every night, the same stretch of road, the same moment, over and over. That's when I saw headlights in the distance, coming toward us from the opposite direction. A truck, moving fast, too fast for the fog. Emily's face contorted with fear. Get out, she said. Get out now. I didn't need to be told twice. I unbuckled my seatbelt and fumbled for the door handle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. What about you? I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. I can't leave, she said, her eyes fixed on the approaching headlights. This is where it happened. This is where I'll always be. I stumbled out of the truck, nearly falling onto the wet asphalt. Emily remained in the passenger seat, her face a mask of resignation and sorrow, illuminated by the approaching headlights. The oncoming truck blared its horn, a long, desperate wail. I heard tires screeching, smelled burning rubber. The ground seemed to shake beneath my feet. I ran into the darkness beyond the shoulder, away from the road, away from Emily and whatever was about to happen. I didn't look back until I heard the crash, a sound that wasn't quite physical, more like reality itself tearing apart. When I finally turned around, the fog was gone. My truck sat exactly where I'd left it, idling peacefully. The other truck was nowhere to be seen. And Emily was gone too. I approached my truck cautiously, half expecting to see her still sitting there, but the passenger seat was empty. The only evidence anyone had been there was a small puddle of water on the floor mat, like someone soaking wet had been sitting there. I drove to the nearest rest area in a daze, my hands shaking on the wheel the entire time. I couldn't bring myself to go back on the road that night. I sat in the truck stop until morning, drinking cup after cup of terrible coffee, trying to make sense of what had happened. I've asked around since then, other truckers, locals who live near that stretch of highway. Some of them have heard the stories. Some even claim to have seen her themselves, the woman in white, looking for a ride, always at night, always alone. I won't drive Interstate 40 at night anymore. I can't, and every time I pass that stretch of highway, even in broad daylight, I find myself scanning the shoulder, half afraid, half hoping to see Emily again. I don't know if she was a ghost or something else entirely. I don't know if what happened that night was real or some hallucination brought on by exhaustion and suggestion. All I know is that somewhere out there, on a foggy stretch of Interstate 40, there's a woman in white still trying to get home. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I can still hear her voice thanking me for stopping. And I wonder, was I helping her, or was she warning me? I guess I'll never know. Story 7. I've been in law enforcement for almost 30 years now, but what happened during that blizzard in '92 still haunts me every day. I'm finally sharing this because I think talking about it might help. Maybe someone reading this has experienced something similar and can understand what I've been carrying all these years. January 17th, 1992. I'll never forget that date. I was a state trooper in Iowa working the overnight shift on Interstate 80. The weather forecasters had been warning about this storm for days, but nobody expected it to hit as hard as it did. Temperatures had dropped to about -20 degrees, and the wind was blowing snow so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in front of you. The kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe. Most reasonable people were home in bed, but I was out there because that's the job. Someone needs to make sure nobody's stranded and freezing to death. I'd been patrolling for about 6 hours, mostly checking abandoned vehicles and helping the occasional stubborn truck driver who thought they could push through. Around 2:15 in the morning, my headlights caught something off the side of the road, a dark shape under what looked like a small mountain of snow. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight, and trudged through knee-deep snow to investigate. The wind was cutting right through my uniform, even with the heavy winter gear. My face hurt from the cold after just seconds of exposure. It was a sedan, a Ford Taurus, dark blue from what I could tell, buried up to its windows in a snowdrift. Protocol said I needed to check for occupants, so I brushed snow from the driver's side window and shined my light inside. Empty. I radioed dispatch to report the vehicle and my location before continuing my check. The passenger seat was clear too. I moved to the back seat where I spotted a small suitcase. Nothing unusual there, probably belonged to a traveler who abandoned their car when the storm got bad and caught a ride with someone else. Smart move, I thought. Then I checked the trunk. God, I wish I hadn't checked that trunk. When I popped it open, at first all I saw was more snow that had somehow blown in. But as I cleared it away, I saw a human hand, pale blue from the cold. I immediately radioed for backup, but I knew it would take time in these conditions. I cleared more snow and saw him, A man, maybe late 30s, lying there completely still. His wrists and ankles were bound with duct tape. His mouth was taped too. But what still keeps me up at night was his eyes, wide open, frozen in terror. He was wearing clean clothes, like Sunday best clothes, but they were arranged unnaturally, like someone had dressed him after he died. I secured the scene as best I could, which wasn't easy in a blizzard. I sat in my patrol car with the heater running, checking my mirrors constantly. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever did this might still be nearby, watching. The wind howled around my vehicle, rocking it slightly. Every shadow looked like a person. Backup arrived about 40 minutes later, 2 other troopers and eventually the crime scene unit, though they struggled to process anything in those conditions. We identified the victim as Richard Meyer, a pharmaceutical rep from Minneapolis who'd been reported missing 4 days earlier. I later learned the autopsy showed he'd been tortured for days before being strangled. That night was just the beginning of the nightmare. 2 weeks later, a colleague in Wisconsin found another body in almost identical circumstances. Abandoned car, snowstorm, victim in the trunk, signs of torture. Then a third in Michigan. We were dealing with a serial killer who used winter storms as cover. The FBI formed a task force that they called Snowman. I was assigned to it temporarily because I found the first victim. We worked day and night trying to establish connections between the victims. They were all professional men, all traveling alone, all found during or after snowstorms. But the most disturbing pattern was how the bodies were treated after death, cleaned, dressed in fresh clothes, and arranged carefully, like some sick ritual. The investigation consumed me. My wife started complaining that even when I was home, I wasn't really there. I'd wake up in cold sweats, seeing that man's frozen face. I started checking the weather obsessively, dreading the next storm. The breakthrough came from Detective Harrington in Minneapolis. He connected our cases to several unsolved murders in the Twin Cities area going back to '89, and he had a suspect, Nathan Blackwood, an ex-cop who'd been forced to resign from the Minneapolis PD in '88 after excessive force complaints. Specifically, he'd been accused of being unnecessarily aggressive during traffic stops in bad weather. I remember looking at Blackwood's personnel photo and feeling sick. He had this smile that didn't reach his eyes. Cold eyes. I'd seen eyes like that before, in the military, in certain hardened criminals, people who had something missing inside them. We were closing in, putting surveillance on Blackwood's known associates and monitoring weather patterns, waiting for the next storm. But in the end, it was dumb luck that caught him. A state trooper in Illinois pulled over a car for a broken taillight. The driver's ID didn't match the vehicle registration, so the troopers searched the car and found duct tape, a police scanner, and detailed weather forecasts. Fingerprints identified him as Blackwood. When they searched his apartment in Minneapolis, they found the evidence we needed: souvenirs from victims, journal entries detailing his hunts, and a counterfeit police uniform. He'd been posing as a trooper, approaching stranded motorists during storms and offering help. Once they trusted him, he'd use a stun gun to incapacitate them, then transport them to abandoned properties where he'd interrogate them for days. I attended his trial. I needed to see it through, to look him in the eye. Throughout the proceedings, he just sat there with this eerie calmness. The only time I saw any emotion was when they displayed photos of the victims after he'd arranged them. He actually smiled. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that evil exists in this world. Blackwood got 15 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Justice was served, I suppose, but it didn't bring back the victims or heal their families, and it didn't fix what broke inside me that night. After the trial, I requested a transfer to administrative duties. I couldn't patrol highways during snowstorms anymore. Every abandoned vehicle made my heart race. Every trunk I opened, I expected to find another victim. My superiors understood. They'd seen how the case affected me. What haunts me most isn't just what I saw in that trunk. It's knowing how close I might have come to encountering Blackwood myself during that storm. If I'd arrived earlier, would I have caught him in the act, or would I have been another victim? During the investigation, we learned he sometimes monitored police radio channels. Was he listening when I called in that abandoned Taurus? Was he watching from somewhere in that blizzard as I discovered what he'd left behind? The case changed how we operate during winter storms. We implemented new verification protocols, buddy systems, and identification codes for officers and motorists. Good changes, necessary changes. But for me, winter will never be the same. Last December, I was driving home from visiting my daughter when a snowstorm hit unexpectedly. I pulled over at a rest stop to wait it out and saw a highway patrol car pull in behind another vehicle. The trooper got out to help the stranded motorist. Everything looked normal by the book, but my hand still reached for the gun I no longer carry, and I couldn't take my eyes off them until they both drove away safely. Some fears never leave you. When the snow falls heavy and the wind howls, I still check my locks twice. I still keep my phone charged and within reach. I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, thinking I hear someone outside. And I still see that man's face, frozen in terror, whenever I close my eyes during a winter storm. Blackwood is locked away for life. I know that. But sometimes when the weather forecast calls for snow, I find myself wondering if there's someone else out there, someone who read about him, someone who waits for the blizzards just like he did. Someone watching for headlights through the swirling white, looking for people who need help. That's why I'm sharing this now. Be careful who you trust when you're stranded. Call dispatch to verify any officer who approaches you. Keep your doors locked until you're certain. And maybe, if the storm is bad enough, just stay home. Because the worst monsters aren't the ones in stories. They're the ones who look just like us, who know how to gain our trust, who use the forces of nature as their accomplice. And winter, with its isolation and desperation, makes the perfect hunting ground. I still check the weather every morning, and I still feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature when they forecast snow. The story 8. I still can't explain what happened that night on Highway 78. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, seen everything from crazy drunk drivers to wildlife stampedes, but nothing comes close to what I experienced 3 weeks ago. I haven't told anyone about this until now. Honestly, I thought maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing from exhaustion, but the more I think about it, the more I know it was real. I was on a standard haul from Phoenix to Dallas, pushing through the night to make my delivery deadline. It was around 2 in the morning, that dead zone when your eyes start playing tricks on you. I'd been driving for about 14 hours with only a couple short breaks, and the road ahead was just endless black, punctuated by my headlights. Highway 78 is notorious for how empty it gets at night. Sometimes you don't see another vehicle for an hour or more. To keep myself awake, I was listening to this late-night radio show called Midnight Highways. It's this program where truckers and travelers call in with weird stories they've experienced on the road. Most of it is bullshit, but it passes the time. That night, they were doing a special on highway hauntings, and this caller was talking about a ghost at this rest stop on Highway 78. Said it was the spirit of some woman who disappeared years ago, never found her body, or figured out what happened to her. According to the story, she now wanders the rest stop looking for help. I remember rolling my eyes, classic urban legend stuff. But then the host mentioned the exact rest stop number, 67, and I realized I was about 20 miles from it. Weird coincidence, right? By then my eyelids were getting heavy. The white lines on the road were starting to blur together, and I knew I needed to stop before I became a statistic. When I saw the sign for Rest Stop 67, I figured it was as good a place as any to grab a quick power nap. The place was completely deserted when I pulled in. Just my semi and rows of empty parking spaces under these old sodium lights that were flickering on and off. Something about the way they flickered made the whole place look like one of those old silent movies. Everything sort of jumping between light and shadow. The bathroom building was this sad little concrete structure with a metal roof, sitting about 50 yards from the parking area. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the bathroom. The whole time, I had this weird feeling like someone was watching me. I've been to hundreds of rest stops at night, and they're always creepy, but this one, I don't know. Something felt off. The air was unusually still and heavy, like right before a thunderstorm. The bathroom was disgusting, typical for these older stops. I did my business quickly, not wanting to spend any more time in there than necessary. As I was washing my hands, I distinctly heard footsteps behind me. Not the echoing kind that bounce off tile. These were soft, like someone wearing socks. I spun around, but there was nobody there. Every stall door was open, and I was completely alone. "Hello," I called out, feeling stupid immediately after. My voice just echoed back at me. I chalked it up to exhaustion and headed back to my truck. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the parking lot, near where the asphalt meets the scrubby desert brush. A woman in what looked like a white dress or gown that moved slightly, even though there wasn't any wind. Her hair was long and dark, and her skin looked unnaturally pale under the flickering lights. She wasn't moving, just staring in my direction with this blank expression. My first thought was that she was some lot lizard, a prostitute who works truck stops. But this rest area was in the middle of nowhere, and she didn't look like she was dressed for that kind of work. Plus, there were no other vehicles around. How the hell did she get there? Against my better judgment, I called out to her. "Hey, you okay?" For a few seconds, she didn't respond. Then her lips moved, and I heard her whisper, "Help me." It was barely audible, but somehow I heard it clearly, even though I was at least 30 yards away from her. I should have gotten in my truck and driven off right then. Everything inside me was screaming that this was wrong, but there was something in her voice, this desperation that felt genuine. What if she was stranded? What if someone had hurt her and left her there? I couldn't just drive away if she really needed help. "What's wrong?" I asked, taking a few steps closer. "Do you need me to call someone?" "Please," she said, her voice still barely above a whisper. "I need a ride. They'll come back if I stay here." I hesitated. In all my years of driving, I've picked up maybe 3 hitchhikers total. It's just not something you do anymore. But she looked so fragile standing there, and I thought about my own daughter. What if she was stranded somewhere and needed help? "Where are you headed?" I asked. "East," she said, "just away from here." I was going east anyway. "I can take you to the next town," I offered, "but that's it." She nodded and started walking toward my truck. As she got closer, I noticed how young she looked, maybe mid-20s. She called herself Sarah when I asked her name. No last name, just Sarah. The moment she climbed into the passenger seat of my cab, the temperature dropped noticeably. I'm not talking about a slight chill. I'm talking about seeing my breath suddenly. I turned up the heat, blaming it on the door being open too long, but the cold lingered around us. We pulled back onto the highway, and for the first 10 minutes or so, neither of us spoke. I kept glancing over at her, but she just stared straight ahead. Her hands were folded in her lap, completely still. She didn't fidget or shift in her seat like most people do. It was like she was barely breathing. "So, how'd you end up at that rest stop?" I finally asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "They left me there," she said softly. "Who did?" She didn't answer, just kept staring at the road ahead. I tried again. "Do you have family somewhere? Someone I can call for you?" "No one's looking for me anymore," she said. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. The radio had been off since I picked her up, but suddenly it crackled to life by itself. Through bursts of static, I could hear the same late-night show I'd been listening to earlier. The host's voice came through in fragments. "Legend of Highway 78. Woman who disappeared. Lures drivers. Never seen again." I reached to turn it off, but Sarah grabbed my wrist. Her hand was ice cold, like touching a corpse. I yanked my arm away instinctively. "Don't," she said. "Listen." The radio continued. "Reports of a woman in white at rest stop 67. Those who stopped to help her found abandoned vehicles." My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked over at Sarah, and for a split second, her face seemed different, older, hollow, with dark circles under her eyes. But when I blinked, she looked normal again. That's when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A black pickup truck was coming up fast behind us, way too fast for that empty stretch of highway. The truck pulled up right on my tail, so close I couldn't even see its headlights anymore. "They found me," Sarah whispered, her voice suddenly tight with fear. "They always find me." "Who? Who found you?" I demanded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The pickup swerved into the left lane and pulled alongside us. I couldn't see the driver clearly, just the outline of someone wearing what looked like a cowboy hat. But there was something off about the silhouette, something about the proportions that didn't look quite human. Sarah started rocking back and forth in her seat. "You shouldn't have stopped," she said. "Now they know about you too." The pickup accelerated and cut in front of me, forcing me to slam on the brakes. My trailer jackknifed slightly before I regained control. The truck ahead slowed down, matching my speed no matter how much I accelerated or decelerated. Sarah's behavior became increasingly erratic. She was pressing herself against the passenger door as far from the windshield as possible. "You have to let me out," she said. "You're in danger. They won't stop until they have me back." "Back where?" I shouted, trying to maneuver around the pickup. "Who the hell are they?" "The ones who took me," she said. "Years ago. They won't let me go. They'll never let me go." That's when it hit me. The radio show, the ghost story, the woman who disappeared. I looked at Sarah again, and this time her appearance didn't change back. Her skin had a grayish tint, and her eyes were sunken and dark. The white dress I thought she was wearing was actually a dirty, torn nightgown with dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "You're her. You're the woman from the story." Sarah turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Help me," she pleaded. "You have to help me escape them, or we'll both be trapped here forever." The black pickup suddenly swerved and came to a stop across both lanes, blocking the highway. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting it. As we skidded to a halt, I caught a glimpse of the driver turning to look at us. The face I saw in that split second will haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't human. I can't even describe it properly. Just wrong in every way a face can be wrong. In that moment of pure terror, I did the only thing I could think of. I threw open my door and ran. I didn't grab my phone, my wallet, nothing. I just bolted toward the woods along the highway. Behind me, I heard Sarah screaming my name, begging me not to leave her. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling through brush and over rocks. Eventually, I collapsed behind a large boulder and stayed there, shaking, until the first light of dawn. I didn't hear any vehicles or footsteps pursuing me, but I was too scared to move. When I finally worked up the courage to return to the highway, the sun was fully up. My truck was sitting exactly where I'd left it, perfectly parked on the shoulder. The black pickup was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Sarah. I approached my truck cautiously, half expecting someone to jump out at me. But everything looked normal. My keys were still in the ignition. The passenger seat was empty, with no sign that anyone had been sitting there. I got in and drove to the nearest town, where I called my dispatcher and made up some story about feeling sick and pulling over to rest. I've never told anyone what really happened that night. Who would believe me? I still drive trucks, but I've requested routes that keep me off Highway 78. Sometimes I wonder if I hallucinated the whole thing from exhaustion, or if I really did encounter something supernatural. But one thing's for certain. I'll never stop at Rest Stop 67 again. And if you're driving Highway 78 at night and see a woman in white asking for help, just keep driving. For your own sake, just keep driving. Story 9. I still can't sleep properly after what happened last autumn. I've been going back and forth about posting this, but I need to tell someone who might believe me, or at least not think I'm completely insane. I've checked news reports, called local police stations, and even tried contacting paranormal investigators. but nobody has any answers. It was October of 2023, and I was driving from San Francisco to Nevada for a job interview. I'm a software developer, and this company in Reno was offering almost double what I was making. The plan was simple: leave early morning, reach Reno by evening, get a good night's sleep, and nail the interview the next day. I'd made the drive once before, so I wasn't worried about the route. My Honda Civic was reliable. I had a full tank of gas, and my phone was charged. The first few hours were uneventful, just me, some podcasts, and the open road. Around 1 in the afternoon, my stomach started growling, and I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. When I spotted a small, roadside diner just off Highway 91, I decided to pull over. The place looked like it was stuck in the 1970s. Vinyl booths, faded wallpaper, and that distinct smell of coffee and grease that all these places have. There were only a few other customers: an old man reading a newspaper in the corner, a trucker at the counter, and a middle-aged couple in a booth near the window. A waitress who looked about 60 approached me with a menu and a tired smile. "Just passing through, hun?" she asked as I slid into a booth. I nodded and ordered a burger with fries and coffee. While waiting for my food, I noticed a bulletin board near the restrooms covered with newspaper clippings. Bored and curious, I wandered over to check it out. Most of the clippings were yellowed with age, but some looked recent. They were all about the same thing: disappearances along Highway 91. Some dated back to the 1980s, others were from just last year. The most recent one was from 3 weeks ago, a college student who had been driving home for fall break and never arrived. His car was found abandoned on the side of the road. No signs of foul play, just gone. Interested in local history? The voice startled me. It was the old man who'd been reading the newspaper. "Just curious," I replied. "That's a lot of missing people for one stretch of highway." He nodded slowly. "Some say it's just people running away from their lives. Others blame it on a cult that supposedly lives in those hills." He pointed vaguely toward the window. "Me? I think there are things out there we ain't meant to understand. My advice: don't stop for nobody on that road after dark." The waitress called that my food was ready, so I thanked him and went back to my booth. I tried to focus on my burger, but those newspaper clippings kept playing in my mind. I told myself it was just small-town folklore, the kind of stories people tell to make their boring towns seem more interesting. After paying, I used the restroom and headed back to my car. It was around 2:30 when I got back on the highway. The sky had clouded over, and the forecast mentioned possible fog in the mountains. I turned on my GPS to check my route, still about 4 hours to Reno. About an hour after leaving the diner, my GPS signal started getting spotty. The voice would cut in and out, and the screen would freeze before updating. I wasn't too concerned. It happens in rural areas. But then my radio started acting weird too. I was listening to a rock station that suddenly dissolved into static. I tried other stations, but they were all the same, just white noise with occasional bursts of distorted voices or music. The road started to climb into more mountainous terrain, and a light fog began to drift across the highway. Not thick enough to be dangerous, but enough to create that eerie, muffled feeling. The traffic had thinned out significantly. I hadn't seen another car for at least 20 minutes. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the shoulder of the road, thumb extended, wearing a white dress that seemed too thin for the chilly weather. Long dark hair, maybe in her 20s. My first instinct was to drive past. Who picks up hitchhikers these days, especially after reading about all those disappearances? But something about her seemed desperate, vulnerable, and honestly, I felt a weird pull, like I couldn't just leave her there. I slowed down and pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her. Through my rearview mirror, I watched her jog up to my car. I rolled down the passenger window as she approached. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, slightly out of breath. "I've been waiting for hours." "Where are you headed?" I asked, still not fully committed to giving her a ride. "Just up the road a ways. My family lives in a small community near the state line. My car broke down yesterday, and I've been trying to get home." She hugged herself against the cold. "I'm Lily, by the way." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "I'm heading to Reno. I can take you as far as your turnoff." She smiled gratefully and slid into the passenger seat. "You're a lifesaver, really." As we pulled back onto the highway, I noticed the fog was getting thicker. Lily was quiet, staring out the window with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I tried making small talk, asking where she was coming from, what she did for work, but her answers were vague and brief. She seemed distracted, constantly checking the side mirror. About 15 minutes after picking her up, I heard a thud from the trunk, like something had shifted or fallen over. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Lily tensed visibly. "Hear what?" "That noise, from the back of the car." She shook her head quickly. "Probably just your spare tire or something." I frowned. "It's secured pretty well, and I don't have much back there, just my overnight bag." Another thud, louder this time. I glanced in the rearview mirror and felt my blood freeze. For a split second, I thought I saw something dark move behind us, like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. The radio, which had been static for the last half hour, suddenly blared to life with a burst of garbled voices before cutting out again. Lily flinched so hard she hit her head on the window. "Are you okay?" I asked. She was breathing rapidly now. "We need to go faster." "What? Why?" "They're coming." Her voice had changed, higher, tighter with fear. "Who's coming? What are you talking about?" She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Please, just drive faster. They'll catch us if we don't hurry." The fog was getting thicker by the minute, reducing visibility to maybe 100 feet ahead. I accelerated slightly, more out of confusion than anything else. The road was curving more frequently as we climbed higher into the mountains. "Lily, you're scaring me. What's going on?" She was constantly looking behind us now. "They've been after me for days. Ever since I got away." "Got away from what? Are you in some kind of trouble?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed at the rearview mirror. "They found us." I looked back and saw headlights in the distance, barely visible through the fog. Just another car on the highway, I thought, but as it got closer, I could see it was moving fast, too fast for these conditions. "It's just another driver," I said, trying to stay calm. "No," she whispered. "It's them." The car behind us was gaining quickly. I could now make out that it was an old black sedan, but the fog made it hard to see details. It was uncomfortably close to my bumper now, close enough that I could see the driver, a man with a pale face and dark, hollow-looking eyes. He was staring directly at me with an expression that made my skin crawl. Lily was practically hyperventilating. "Don't let them take me back, please." The black sedan suddenly swerved into the oncoming lane and accelerated to pull alongside us. The driver rolled down his window and yelled something I couldn't hear. He gestured frantically for me to pull over. "What does he want?" I asked, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He wants you to let me go," Lily said, her voice suddenly much calmer. "But you can't." The man in the sedan was now pointing at Lily and shouting. I caught fragments. "Danger, and not what she seems." Panic rising, I pressed harder on the accelerator. The sedan matched my speed. We were now both going dangerously fast on the foggy mountain road. The man was still shouting, his face contorted with what looked like desperation rather than anger. "Turn off the headlights," Lily suddenly commanded. "What? That's insane." "Turn them off," she screamed, her hand lunging for the controls. I knocked her hand away. "Stop it! What the hell is wrong with you?" The black sedan suddenly dropped back, and for a moment I thought we'd lost them. Then it rammed into my rear bumper, sending us fishtailing. I struggled to maintain control, the tires screeching as we skidded dangerously close to the guardrail. "He's trying to kill us," I shouted. Lily's face had changed somehow. In the dim light of the dashboard, her features seemed sharper, her eyes darker. "No, he's trying to save you." Another thud from the trunk, this time so violent the whole car shook. I was beyond terrified now, trapped in a car with a clearly unstable woman, being pursued by an aggressive driver on a foggy mountain road with poor visibility. Making a split-second decision, I yanked the wheel and took a sudden turn-off that appeared on the right, a narrow road that disappeared into the trees. The sedan missed the turn and shot past us. I killed the headlights and coasted about 50 yards down the side road before pulling over, hoping the other driver wouldn't double back. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, turning to Lily. "Who are you really, and who is that guy?" But Lily wasn't looking at me. She was staring out the windshield, her face drained of all color. I followed her gaze and felt my heart stop. Dark figures were emerging from the fog surrounding the car. At first, I thought they were people, but as they got closer, I could see they were wrong. Their proportions were off, limbs too long, movements too fluid, and their faces, they had what looked like faces, but they were twisted into expressions that no human face should be able to make, malicious grins that stretched literally from ear to ear. One of them pressed its face against my window and I screamed. Its eyes were completely black and its skin had a strange, waxy quality to it. It tapped on the glass with impossibly long fingers, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "They've found us," Lily whispered. But she didn't sound scared anymore. She sounded satisfied. I fumbled for the ignition, desperate to restart the car and get away, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys. As I bent to retrieve them, bright headlights suddenly flooded the area from behind us. The dark figures scattered, shrinking back from the light. It was the black sedan. The driver was out of his car now, running toward us, shouting something I couldn't hear. The figures retreated further into the fog, but they didn't leave completely. I could still see their silhouettes at the edge of the light, watching. When I turned back to the passenger seat, Lily was gone. The door was closed, but she had simply vanished. In her place was a small, ancient-looking book with symbols on the cover I didn't recognize. The driver of the sedan reached my car and pounded on my window, his face urgent. I rolled it down a crack, too terrified to do more. "Drive!" he yelled. "Get to the gas station 10 miles ahead. Don't stop for anything." "Who are you? What were those things?" I asked, my voice breaking. "No time. They'll be back when I leave. The light keeps them at bay, but not for long." He thrust something through the window crack, a small metal amulet on a chain. "Take this, it'll help. Now go." I didn't need to be told twice. I started the car and peeled out, the tires spitting gravel. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man getting back in his sedan, the dark figures already closing in around him as his headlights cut through the fog. I drove like hell, not caring about speed limits or road conditions. The fog seemed to thin out the faster I went, and after what seemed like an eternity, I saw the bright lights of a gas station ahead. I practically crashed into the parking lot and ran inside, the amulet clutched in my hand, leaving everything else in the car. The attendant looked startled as I burst in, clearly disheveled and terrified. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane, even as I said them. He gave me a cup of coffee and called the sheriff, who arrived 30 minutes later and took my statement. They searched my car but found nothing unusual. No book, no evidence anyone else had been in the vehicle. The deputy suggested I might have fallen asleep at the wheel and had a vivid nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know Lily was real, whatever she was. Those figures in the fog were real too. Sometimes at night, I think I can still hear their laughter. This high, chittering sound that's almost like static on a radio. I never made it to that job interview. I drove back to San Francisco the next day and haven't left the city since. I still have the amulet the man gave me. It's a simple design, a circle with strange markings inside. I keep it with me always, especially at night. I've spent months researching Highway 91 disappearances, trying to find any mention of Lily or those dark figures. There are stories, fragmentary accounts from other drivers who had strange experiences on that road, but nothing concrete. The newspaper clippings I saw in that diner, I can't even find the diner on any map or review site. All I know is that something is out there on Highway 91, something that wears human faces and preys on human kindness. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that thumping sound from my trunk, even though there's nothing there when I check. Story 10. I don't even know where to begin with this. It's been 3 weeks since it happened, and I still wake up in cold sweats, thinking I can hear tires on gravel behind me. I've been going to therapy, taking anxiety meds, the whole 9 yards, but I'm still jumping at shadows. Writing this down might help me process it, I don't know. All I know is I can't keep it bottled up anymore. I worked actually, since I transferred to the day shift as an ER nurse at Pine Haven Memorial. It's about a 40-minute drive from my house, which sits in this little cluster of homes out past where the suburbs end and the proper countryside begins. I never minded the drive before. In fact, I used to love it. The solitude after a chaotic 12-hour shift was like a decompression chamber between work and home. That night, I'd been on since 7 in the morning, but we had a major car pileup come in around 6 in the evening, so I ended up staying until almost midnight. I was exhausted, the kind where your eyes burn and your brain feels wrapped in cotton. The hospital parking lot was mostly empty when I finally trudged out to my car. Just the overnight staff and a few visitors' vehicles scattered across the dimly lit concrete. I remember standing there for a minute, keys in hand, just breathing in the cool night air. It was mid-October, and there was this crisp smell, like dry leaves and wood smoke. I checked my phone, 11:53 p.m., and texted my roommate Kate that I was finally heading home. She didn't respond, probably already asleep. The drive started like any other. I took the main road out of town, past the closed shops and restaurants, windows dark except for the occasional security light. Traffic lights blinked yellow at empty intersections. A few cars passed going the other way, probably people heading into the city for late shifts or coming from bars. Normal stuff. I hit the highway, and that's when things started to feel off. About 5 minutes in, I noticed headlights behind me. Not unusual, obviously, but they were close. Too close. I was doing the speed limit, maybe 5 over if I'm being honest, but this car was practically riding my bumper. I couldn't see much in my rear view except bright lights. At first, I thought it was just some impatient jerk, so I moved to the right lane to let them pass. They didn't. Just moved right along with me, still tailgating. I sped up a little, thinking maybe they were just oblivious. The car sped up too. That's when the first real flutter of unease hit me. I'm not normally paranoid, but at midnight on a nearly empty highway, with someone following that closely, it doesn't feel right. I told myself maybe they were just heading the same way, maybe they lived out near me. Pine Haven isn't huge. It happens. When I reached my exit, I signaled and turned off. The car followed. My heart rate picked up a notch. Still, I reasoned, maybe they really did live in my direction, but the doubt was creeping in. Instead of taking my usual route home, I decided to test my theory. There's this winding back road that loops around before eventually reconnecting with the main road to my neighborhood. No one takes it unless they live on it, and even then, it's not the most convenient route. I turned onto it without signaling at the last second. The car behind me swerved to follow. That's when I knew for sure. This person was following me. My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. I remember gripping it so hard my knuckles went white. My mind was racing through options. I couldn't go home. What if they followed me there? I couldn't lead them to my house. My phone was in my purse on the passenger seat, but I didn't dare take my eyes off the road to fumble for it, not on those curves. The back road is unlit, winding through dense woods with barely any houses, just trees pressing close on both sides, branches creating this tunnel effect in my headlights, and behind me, those high beams still too close, lighting up my entire car interior. I was about halfway down the road when I spotted a small clearing off to the side, just a gravel turnout where utility vehicles sometimes park to access the power lines. I made a split-second decision and pulled over, thinking maybe they'd pass and I could turn around, head back toward town. The car slowed as it approached. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had my hand on my phone now, 911 ready to dial. The car crept past. It was an older model sedan, dark-colored, maybe navy blue or black, hard to tell in the darkness. As it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver through their side window. I'll never forget that face. It was a man with wild, unkempt hair sticking up in all directions like he'd been electrocuted. But it was his expression that froze my blood. He was grinning, this wide, manic smile that showed too many teeth. Our eyes met for just a second as he passed, and I swear he winked at me. The car continued a few yards past my turnout, then stopped. Just sat there, brake lights glowing red in the darkness. I panicked. I threw my car into reverse, then spun the wheel to turn around, gravel spraying from my tires. I floored it back the way we'd come, praying he wouldn't follow. In my rear view, I saw his headlights flash as he executed a three-point turn. Then he was behind me again, closer than before. I was doing 60 on a road meant for 35, taking curves that made my tires squeal, and he kept pace effortlessly. I grabbed my phone and tried to dial 911, but I kept hitting wrong numbers with my shaking fingers while trying to keep my eyes on the road. When I finally got through, the dispatcher's voice sounded tinny and far away over my car speakers. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's following me, I gasped. I'm on Mill Creek Road heading back toward Highway 16. Dark sedan, can't see the plates. He's right on my tail, driving aggressively. Ma'am, can you get to a public place, a gas station or store? I don't know what's open this late, I started to say, then remembered. There's a gas station at the junction with the highway. It's open 24 hours. Head there and stay on the line, the dispatcher instructed. I could see the junction approaching, the highway overpass looming ahead. The gas station's fluorescent lights were like a beacon in the darkness. I made the turn so fast my tires squealed, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought I might flip the car. The sedan followed, closer than ever. I could hear the engine revving behind me. I screeched into the gas station parking lot and pulled right up to the door. I didn't even turn off my engine, just grabbed my phone and purse and ran inside. The bell over the door jingled cheerfully, completely at odds with the terror coursing through me. There was one person inside, an older man behind the counter. He looked up from his newspaper, startled by my entrance. "Someone's following me," I blurted, still clutching my phone with the 911 call active. He followed me all the way from the highway. The man, his name tag said Frank, stood up immediately. He was in his 60s with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. Not exactly the cavalry I'd been hoping for, but in that moment, another human presence felt like salvation. "Lock the door," Frank said, reaching under the counter. He pulled out a baseball bat, old and scuffed, but solid-looking. "Where are they?" As if on cue, headlights swept across the front of the store as the sedan pulled in, parking a few spaces away from my car. The dispatcher was still on the line, telling me officers were en route, but they were at least 15 minutes out. "He's here," I whispered, backing away from the glass door. Frank moved to stand beside me, bat held ready. We watched as the driver's door opened. The man stepped out, and under the harsh overhead lights of the gas station, he looked even more unhinged than the glimpse I'd caught earlier. His hair was indeed wild, not just messy, but like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up unevenly and jeans that hung loosely on his thin frame. And that smile, that horrible, too-wide smile, was still there. He sauntered toward the door, his gait uneven, almost playful. When he found it locked, he pressed his face against the glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer in. "I just want to help," he called, voice muffled through the door. "You seemed lost. I was trying to make sure you got home safe." Frank stepped forward. "The police are on their way. You need to leave." The man's smile faltered, then returned, wider than before. "No need for police. Just a misunderstanding. I'm a good Samaritan." He rattled the door handle. Frank raised the bat slightly. I said, "Leave. Now." Something changed in the man's expression then, a darkening, like clouds rolling over the sun. The smile remained, but his eyes went flat and cold. "You don't understand," he said, voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried through the glass. "She needs my help. She doesn't know what's out there, what's waiting in the dark." I stepped back further, bumping into a display of chips that rattled loudly in the tense silence. The dispatcher was asking what was happening, but I couldn't find my voice to answer. "Last warning," Frank said. "Get in your car and go." The man stared at us for a long moment, then shrugged dramatically. "If that's how you want it." He turned and walked back to his car, unhurried. "He's leaving," I told the dispatcher, relief flooding through me. "He's going back to his car." But he didn't drive away. Instead, he sat in his vehicle, engine running, lights on, just waiting. 5 minutes passed like this. 10. The dispatcher assured me officers were getting close. Frank kept watch at the door, bat still in hand. I sat on a stool behind the counter trying to stop shaking. Then the lights went out. Not just in the store, everywhere. The gas station, the street lights along the highway, everything. Just pitch blackness, except for the headlights of the sedan, still pointed at the store. "Generator should kick in," Frank muttered, fumbling in the dark. I heard him moving behind the counter. Before the backup power could come on, there was a roar of an engine revving. Headlights swung in a wide arc. He was turning his car around. "Get down!" Frank shouted, just as the sedan accelerated straight toward the storefront. I dove behind the counter as the crash came, not through the door as I expected, but against the concrete pillars protecting the gas pumps. Metal screeched, glass shattered, the car backed up, engine still running. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. I peered over the counter to see the sedan, front end crumpled, backing up for another run. Frank was already shoving a heavy display case in front of the door. I rushed to help him, pushing with all my strength as adrenaline surged through me. We barely got it in place before the car hit again, this time aiming for the door. The impact shook the whole building, but the barrier held. The man got out again, seemingly unfazed by the crash. Blood trickled down his forehead from where he must have hit the steering wheel, but that horrible smile never faltered. He picked up something from the ground, a piece of metal debris from his car, and began tapping it against the windows, not hard enough to break them, just a steady, maddening rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. "Do you know what's out there?" he called, voice sing-song now. "Do you know what hunts in these woods at night? I do. I've seen them. I was trying to save you from them." Tap, tap, tap. "But now you're trapped in here with me," he continued. "And they're coming. They always come when there's fear. They can smell it." His face pressed against the window again, smearing blood on the glass. "I can smell it too. Your fear. It's delicious." I was sobbing now, crouched behind the counter with Frank, who had one arm around my shoulders and the bat clutched in his other hand. The 911 dispatcher was still on the line, saying officers were minutes away, to hang on, just hang on. The tapping stopped. We heard footsteps circling the building, trying other doors, windows, then silence. "Is he gone?" I whispered. Frank shook his head. "Don't move." We waited, breath held, straining to hear over the hum of the emergency lights. Nothing. Then, bang! Something hit the back door hard enough to make it buckle in its frame. Bang! Again. Bang! A third time, and this time the door frame splintered. Frank stood, raising the bat. "Stay here," he told me. "If he gets in, run for my truck. Keys are in the visor." Before I could protest, he moved toward the back room where the storage area and rear exit were located. I wanted to call him back, but terror had frozen my vocal cords. There was a crash, the sound of struggling, a shout. I curled into a ball, phone clutched to my chest, the dispatcher's voice a distant murmur I could no longer process. Then suddenly blessed sound, sirens, multiple sirens growing louder. The front of the store lit up with red and blue flashing lights. I heard car doors slamming, voices shouting commands. I stayed frozen, unable to move, unable to believe it was really over. Frank appeared from the back room, bat still in hand, a nasty gash on his cheek but otherwise intact. "Police are here," he said unnecessarily. "That psycho tried to get in the back, but he ran when he heard the sirens." I stumbled to my feet just as officers breached the barricade we'd made. They swept the store, checked on us, took our statements. Outside, other officers had apprehended the man trying to flee into the woods behind the station. As they dragged him to a police car, I caught a final glimpse of him. That smile was gone now, replaced by something even more disturbing, a blank, empty expression, like there was nothing behind his eyes at all. As they pushed him into the back seat, he suddenly looked straight at me. "They're still coming," he called. "I was trying to help you. I was trying to save you." The car door slammed, cutting off his words. But I'll never forget them, or the absolute conviction in his voice, like he genuinely believed whatever delusion had driven him to terrorize me all night. Dawn was breaking by the time I left the gas station. Frank refused medical attention for his cut, saying it was just a scratch. The police told me they'd found multiple restraints in the man's car: rope, duct tape, zip ties. I try not to think about what would have happened if I hadn't made it to the gas station. I don't drive at night anymore. I transferred to day shifts. I've moved in with my parents closer to town. I've installed security cameras, carry pepper spray, take self-defense classes, but none of it makes me feel safe. Because sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, I hear his voice again. They're still coming. And for just a moment, I wonder if he really was trying to save me from something else, something worse than him. Then I remember that smile, and I know the only monster on that road that night was the one behind the wheel of that dark sedan, hunting me through the night. Story 11. I don't even know why I'm writing this down. Part of me just needs to get it out, I guess. I've been seeing a therapist for 3 years now, but I still can't sleep more than a couple hours without the nightmares. I worked at Chicago PD's 23rd Precinct for almost 12 years, and what happened there in '88 still haunts me. I was Officer Rachel Martinez back then, 31 years old and 7 years on the force. It started in April of '88. I was doing a routine evidence check for a cold case, this old robbery from '79 that new technology might have helped with. Something felt off right away. The evidence bag was properly sealed, security tag intact, all signatures in order. But when I opened it, everything inside was rearranged. Not tampered with exactly, but deliberately positioned. The items formed what looked like numbers. I might have dismissed it as coincidence if it had been just that one bag. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled a second cold case. Same thing. Evidence repositioned into what looked like coordinates. By the end of my shift, I'd checked 14 cold cases spanning back to the '60s. Every single one had been arranged the same way, despite having intact security seals. I showed my supervisor, Lieutenant Davis. He just stared at the evidence, his face going pale. "This is impossible," he kept saying. "The seals weren't broken. How did someone get inside?" We worked out the coordinates that night. They pointed to an abandoned warehouse about 6 miles from the precinct. Davis wanted to handle it quietly. No report, no official investigation. Just me and him checking it out the next morning. The warehouse looked like it had been empty for years. Dust everywhere, broken windows. But inside, in the center of the floor, was a single metal filing cabinet that looked brand new. It wasn't dusty. It didn't have a speck of dirt on it. Inside were files, personnel files on every single officer who had handled those 14 evidence bags over the decades. Mine was in there too, with details no one should have known. My home address, my parents' names, even what I ate for dinner 3 nights before, and photos. God, the photos. Pictures of me sleeping in my bedroom, pictures of me brushing my teeth, pictures of me reading on my couch with the curtains closed. There were surveillance photos of all of us. Officers who had retired 20 years ago. Officers who had died. Photos taken inside their homes at impossible angles, like someone had been standing in corners where no one could physically fit. Davis called in a small team he trusted. We removed everything from the warehouse and locked it all in a secure room at the precinct. He swore us to secrecy, said if word got out, we'd cause panic. 2 weeks later, Officer James Chen was assigned overnight evidence room duty. Chen was a good guy, married with a 2-year-old. He'd been on the force for 5 years and volunteered for night shifts so he could spend days with his kid. The next morning, Chen wasn't at his desk. His car was still in the parking lot, his coffee half finished, radio playing. We searched the entire precinct, nothing. The security footage showed him doing his rounds at 2:15 in the morning, then sitting at his desk. At 3:20, he looked up suddenly like he heard something, got up, and walked out of frame. That was it. We found him 72 hours later inside a sealed evidence locker, one that had been empty the day before. The locker was locked from the outside. Chen was... Jesus, it's still hard to describe. He looked like he was in his 80s. Gray hair, wrinkled skin, cataracts. The medical examiner confirmed it was him through dental records, but said his body showed signs of someone who had aged 50 years overnight. Chen was 34. The ME said it was impossible, that a body can't age like that. But there he was. After Chen, things got worse. The evidence inventory system started glitching. It would generate reports for crimes that hadn't happened yet. Detailed reports with victims' names, crime scenes, even the evidence that would be collected. Davis tried to keep it quiet, but word got out when officers were dispatched to an address for a domestic violence call that matched a report generated 3 hours earlier. They arrived just as the situation was escalating. The report predicted the events with 94% accuracy. By June, we were all terrified of the evidence room. Officers would draw straws for who had to go down there. Patterson swore he saw filing cabinets move on their own. Johnson said the temperature would drop 20 degrees in certain corners. Officers Patricia Williams and Robert Nolan were doing inventory one afternoon when they radioed that they saw other officers in the evidence room. Officers in outdated uniforms walking between the shelves. When they tried to communicate with them, their radios died. They were found unconscious the next morning. Both died within a week from unexplained cardiac events. Patricia was 29, Robert was 42. I was assigned to review the security footage from that day. There was nothing on the tapes where Williams and Nolan said they saw the officers, just empty aisles. But at certain points there were shadows where there shouldn't have been, movements at the edge of the frame, and in one 5-second clip you could clearly see a hand reach into frame, a hand wearing a Chicago PD uniform sleeve from the 1950s. I went back to the warehouse where we found the files. I don't know why, maybe looking for answers. The building had been demolished. In its place was a construction site for new apartments. One of the workers recognized my uniform and came over. "You with the 23rd?" he asked. When I nodded, he looked nervous. We found something weird in the foundation. Old police evidence bags buried in the concrete. The weird thing is, the concrete was poured in 1928, but some of the bags are labeled from the 70s. Is that some kind of joke? I called Davis immediately. By the time a team arrived, the construction crew had uncovered 37 evidence bags embedded in the original foundation. Bags from cases that had been solved years after the building was constructed. The bags were perfectly preserved, like they'd been placed there yesterday. Davis lost it after that. He ordered the entire evidence facility evacuated. As we were clearing out, all the security cameras in the evidence room activated at once. On the monitors, we could see shadowy figures in police uniforms from different decades standing at attention in the main aisle. Then, an unidentified voice began conducting roll call, reading names of officers who had died in the line of duty going back to the founding of the Chicago PD. We sealed the facility that day. Davis filed a classified report concluding that the evidence room had somehow become what he called a temporal nexus, a place where past, present, and future law enforcement activities were converging. The building was demolished in '89. I transferred, to another precinct after that. Davis retired. Most of the officers who witnessed the events requested transfers or left the force entirely. The official story was contamination in the building, toxic mold that caused hallucinations and health issues. But even after demolition, things kept happening. Officers from the new precinct built on the same grounds report phantom radio transmissions, calls for backup from officers who died decades ago. Security cameras occasionally pick up glimpses of officers in outdated uniforms walking through walls. 3 different night shift officers have reported seeing apparitions of deceased officers sitting at desks, still working their cases. I left the force in '94. Couldn't take it anymore. But I still have nightmares about Chen's aged face, about those coordinates arranged in evidence bags that should have been sealed, about the photos of me sleeping in my home. Last month I received a manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single evidence bag, security seal, intact. I haven't opened it. It's sitting in my closet right now. Sometimes at night, I swear I can hear it rustling, like someone's arranging the contents. The thing that scares me most? The evidence tag has tomorrow's date on it. Story 12. I still get that sick feeling in my stomach when I drive past mile marker 109 on Highway 41. After what happened, I don't even take that route anymore unless I absolutely have to. It's been almost 2 years, but I can't shake what I saw that night, and I'm only now working up the courage to write this down. I work as a night shift nurse at the Regional Medical Center in Cartersville, Georgia. On December 14, 2021, I was driving home around 3:30 in the morning after a particularly brutal 12-hour shift. I was exhausted but alert. You get used to functioning on minimal sleep in my line of work. The highway was completely empty, which wasn't unusual for that time of night in rural Georgia. It had rained earlier, and there was this eerie mist hanging low over the road. My headlights were cutting through it, creating this tunnel vision effect that made me feel even more isolated. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show about conspiracy theories that I wasn't really paying attention to. I first noticed something was off when my phone lost signal. Not gradually, like when you're driving into a dead zone. It just cut out completely mid-text to my boyfriend, letting him know I was on my way home. Then my radio started getting staticky before switching to white noise. I remember thinking it was weird, but figured it was just spotty rural coverage. That's when I noticed the mile marker, 109. Nothing special about it really, just a green sign on the side of the road. But as I passed it, my car's dashboard lights flickered. Just for a second, but enough to make me glance down. When I looked back up, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. They weren't there before. I'm absolutely certain of that. The road had been empty behind me for miles, and suddenly there was a vehicle there, maybe a quarter mile back. I didn't hear it approach either, which struck me as strange even then. The vehicle was gaining on me quickly, too quickly for a normal car on this highway. I instinctively pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my old Toyota up to 70 miles per hour. The headlights kept pace easily. That's when I started to get nervous. This stretch of Highway 41 isn't known for being particularly dangerous, but you hear stories, especially as a woman driving alone at night. The vehicle, I still couldn't tell what kind it was, got close enough that its headlights were filling my car with bright white light. I expected it to pass me or flash police lights, but it just stayed there, right on my tail. I was getting scared, my hands sweating on the steering wheel. Then it vanished. 1 second the headlights were blinding me through my mirrors, and the next, nothing. Complete darkness behind me. I checked all my mirrors frantically, even slowing down a bit, but there was no sign of the vehicle. It was as if it had never been there at all. I speed up again, feeling thoroughly freaked out, but telling myself I was just tired, that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. That's when I saw the blue Honda pulled over on the shoulder about half a mile ahead, hazard lights blinking. As I got closer, I could see a police cruiser parked behind it, lights off. My first thought was relief. A police officer meant safety. My second thought was confusion. Why weren't the cruiser's lights on if it was a traffic stop? Against my better judgment, I slowed down as I approached. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. As I passed the two vehicles, I glanced over. Both appeared empty. The driver's door of the Honda was wide open, and I could see the dome light was on. The police car's driver door was closed, but there was no one inside that I could see. I considered stopping. Maybe someone needed help, but something primitive in my brain was screaming at me to keep going. So I did. About 100 yards past the cars, my headlights illuminated something that made me slam on my brakes. There was a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, facing away from the road. It looked like a police officer. I could make out what seemed to be a uniform and what might have been a flashlight hanging limply at their side. I stopped completely, my car idling in the middle of the empty highway. The figure didn't move. I couldn't tell if they'd heard me stop. Common sense told me to drive away, but what if the officer needed help? What if someone was hurt? As a nurse, I couldn't just leave if medical assistance was needed. I rolled down my window about an inch and called out, "Hello, officer, do you need help?" My voice sounded thin and weak in the night air. The figure turned, not in a normal way, but all at once, mechanically, like a mannequin being rotated. I couldn't make out any facial features from that distance, but I could tell they were now facing me. The flashlight at their side lifted, and suddenly a beam of light hit my windshield directly in my eyes, blinding me. I shielded my face with my hand, and that's when I heard it. A sound like static, but with a rhythm to it, almost like someone trying to speak through heavy interference. It was coming from outside my car, but it also seemed to be coming through my radio, which I was certain I'd turned off after it went to static earlier. The figure started moving toward my car. Not walking exactly. It's hard to describe, but it was like they were gliding, too smooth, feet not quite connecting with the ground properly. The flashlight never wavered from my eyes. That was enough for me. I hit the gas hard, my tires squealing on the wet asphalt as I took off. In my rearview mirror, I could see the beam of light still pointed at me, growing smaller as I put distance between us. About a mile down the road, my phone suddenly came back to life, buzzing with incoming text messages. The radio clicked back on mid-sentence, the late-night host talking about alien abductions of all things. I shut it off immediately. I was breathing hard, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just an officer doing their job, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong about what I'd just experienced. When I got home, I was still so shaken that my boyfriend woke up and found me sitting in the living room with all the lights on. I told him what happened, and he looked concerned, but suggested I was overtired and seeing things. I almost believed him. Almost. The next morning, I turned on the local news while getting ready for bed. The joy of night shift. The lead story stopped me cold. A state trooper had gone missing on Highway 41 overnight. His patrol car and an abandoned blue Honda Civic were found exactly where I'd seen them. The officer, identified as Trooper Michael Brennan, had responded to a call about an abandoned vehicle and hadn't been heard from since. I felt like I was going to throw up. I sat down hard on my couch, staring at the TV as they showed footage of the scene in daylight. They interviewed the sheriff, who mentioned that cameras had been installed along that stretch of highway years ago after a series of disappearances, but that the cameras had experienced a technical malfunction overnight and hadn't captured anything useful. I should have called the police right then. I should have told them what I saw, but I was terrified. What would I even say? That I saw the missing officer acting like some kind of robot? That he moved wrong? That I heard static that sounded like speech? They'd think I was crazy or worse, somehow involved. So I kept quiet. I told myself I'd call in an anonymous tip later, but I never did. The guilt has been eating at me ever since. A week later, they found Trooper Brennan's flashlight in the woods, about 50 yards from where his car had been parked. Nothing else. No body, no blood, no signs of struggle, just his flashlight. The owner of the Honda Civic, A woman named Alicia Chen was never found either. I started researching after that. I couldn't help myself. That's when I learned about the other disappearances along that same stretch of road, about Deputy Forrester back in 2003, and Brandon Keller and the others. About the thin spot theory proposed by that former FBI agent. I also learned that the cameras along Highway 41 fail every 7 years, almost to the day. The last failure had been in December 2017. The one I witnessed was 4 years early. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, it's what I realized later, going over it again and again in my head. That figure by the tree line, I'm certain now it wasn't Trooper Brennan. The height was wrong, the build was wrong, and the uniform, when I think about it now, wasn't quite right either. It was older, different, like a uniform from years ago. I think what I saw that night was Deputy Forrester, or something wearing his appearance, something that's been stuck there since 2003. And I think whatever it is, it's getting stronger, able to affect the cameras outside of their regular cycle. I don't know why I wasn't taken too. Maybe because I didn't get out of my car. Maybe because I was just passing through and not directly investigating like the others. Or maybe I was just lucky. All I know is that I avoid Highway 41 now, especially at night. I take the long way home, adding 30 minutes to my commute. My boyfriend thinks I'm being ridiculous, but he didn't see what I saw. He didn't hear that static speech or see how that figure moved. The strangest part? Last week I got a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my phone froze, then displayed a string of coordinates. I looked them up later from my computer. They pointed to a location in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the exact same coordinates found in Brandon Keller's GPS, according to the news reports. I haven't told anyone about the text. I'm afraid of what might happen if I do. I'm afraid that by seeing what I saw, I've somehow been marked, that whatever is on that stretch of highway, that nowhere road, as they call it, isn't finished with me yet. The cameras are due for their next scheduled failure in late 2024. I'm planning to be as far away from Georgia as possible when that happens. I don't know what's out there on Highway 41, but I know it's patient and I know it's waiting. Story 13. I still don't know how to explain what happened that night in July of 2024. I've replayed it in my head countless times, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. My friends and I don't really talk about it anymore. When we do, we just give each other this look, like we all know what we saw, but we can't bring ourselves to discuss it. It was supposed to be a fun road trip, that's all. Just a weekend getaway from our boring lives in upstate New York. There were 4 of us. Me, Jake, my roommate, Lisa, Jake's girlfriend, and Mitch, my buddy from college. We'd been planning to drive toward the coast, maybe hit some beaches, drink some beers, nothing crazy. We left around 2 in the afternoon. The weather was perfect. Warm July sunshine, clear skies. We took Jake's old Honda Civic. It wasn't the most comfortable ride for 4 people, but we didn't care. We had the windows down, music blasting, snacks overflowing from the center console. We were just happy to be away from work and responsibilities for a few days. About 3 hours into the drive, we hit Route 7. The sun was starting to set, and the scenery was changing. More trees, fewer houses, that kind of thing. We were all getting a bit restless from being in the car, but the vibe was still good. Jake was driving, Lisa was in the passenger seat, and Mitch and I were crammed in the back. That's when we saw her. She was standing on the side of the road with her thumb out. A hitchhiker. A young woman in a white dress. In the fading light, she looked almost, I don't know, ethereal, like she didn't quite belong there. But at the same time, she seemed normal enough. Just a girl, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and this simple white sundress. "Should we stop?" Jake asked, already slowing down. Lisa was immediately against it. "Are you crazy? We don't pick up hitchhikers. Haven't you seen any horror movies?" But there was something about this girl. She looked so lost, vulnerable. I don't know why, but I felt like we needed to help her. "Come on, it's still. Light out," I said. "We can't just leave her here in the middle of nowhere." Mitch agreed with me, and Jake was already pulling over, so Lisa was outvoted. The girl approached the car slowly. Up close, her face was prettier than I'd realized. Pale skin, large dark eyes, full lips. She smiled when Jake rolled down the window. "Hi," she said, her voice soft and a little raspy, like she hadn't spoken in a while. "Are you guys heading east?" "Yeah, toward the coast," Jake told her. "Need a ride?" She nodded, her smile widening. "That would be amazing. I'm Emily." So we let her in. Mitch scooted to the middle, and Emily slid in next to him. I was squished against the door now, but I didn't mind. There was something exciting about picking up a stranger, doing a good deed, adding a bit of spontaneity to our trip. But as soon as she settled in, I felt it. The atmosphere in the car changed. It wasn't sudden, more like a gradual shift, like when clouds slowly move in front of the sun. The carefree vibe we'd had all day started to feel heavy, tense. "So, Emily," Lisa said, twisting around in her seat, "where are you headed exactly?" Emily's eyes met Lisa's, and I swear the temperature in the car dropped a few degrees. "Just east," she said vaguely. "I need to get home." "Where's home?" Mitch asked. Emily didn't answer right away. She was staring out the window, her fingers tapping against her thigh in this weird, irregular rhythm. "It's not far now," she finally said. "Just keep driving." Jake and Lisa exchanged a look. I could tell Lisa was regretting our decision, and honestly, I was starting to feel the same way. There was something off about Emily, the way she sat so still except for those tapping fingers, the way she wouldn't give us straight answers, the way she smelled like soil and something sweet and rotting. We drove in uncomfortable silence for about 20 minutes. The sun had almost completely set now, and the road was getting darker, more isolated. Trees pressed in on both sides, and the highway had narrowed to a two-lane road. Then we came to a fork. The main road continued to the right, but there was a smaller, unmarked road veering off to the left. "Take the left," Emily said suddenly, her voice no longer soft but sharp and commanding. Jake hesitated. I think we need to stay on the main road to get to—" "Left!" Emily's voice filled the car, impossibly loud. I actually covered my ears, it was so piercing. Jake, startled, jerked the wheel, and we swerved onto the left road. As soon as we did, I felt my stomach drop. This road was different, narrower, darker, the trees forming a canopy overhead that blocked out what little daylight remained. "What the hell, Jake?" Lisa hissed. "Get back on the main road." I don't know why I did that," Jake stammered. He looked pale, shaken. "I didn't mean to turn." "It's the right way," Emily said, her voice back to that soft, raspy whisper. "Trust me." I turned to look at her, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Her dress, which had looked pristine when we picked her up, now had dark stains on it. Dirt, mud, I couldn't tell in the dim light, but they hadn't been there before. "I think we should turn around," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This doesn't look like the right way." Emily's head snapped toward me, and her eyes, they didn't look right. Too wide, too dark, like there were no whites at all, just pupils that had expanded to fill her entire eye socket. I blinked, and they looked normal again. Had I imagined it? "Keep driving," she said, not looking at me, but at Jake. "We're almost there." The road got worse, unpaved now, just dirt and gravel, the car bumping and jostling us. The trees seemed to close in, branches scraping against the windows. It was fully dark outside, our headlights the only illumination, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move and twist. And then she was gone. 1 second Emily was sitting next to Mitch, and the next, the seat was empty. No sound, no movement, just empty space where a person had been. "What the fuck?" Mitch yelled, pressing himself against me. "Where did she go?" Before any of us could answer, there was a loud bang from the roof of the car, like something heavy had landed on it. Jake swerved in panic, the car fishtailing on the loose gravel. He slammed on the brakes and we skidded to a stop, all of us breathing hard, eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound our ragged breathing and the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. Then we heard it, giggling. a high-pitched, childlike giggle coming from somewhere in the woods beside us. "Emily?" Jake called out, his voice cracking. "Are you out there?" More giggling, louder now, moving away from us, deeper into the trees. "We should go," Lisa said urgently. "Turn the car around and get back to the main road." But there was something compelling about that laughter, something that made me want to follow it, to find out what was happening, and I could tell by the looks on Jake and Mitch's faces that they felt it too. "We can't just leave her out here," Mitch said. "What if she's hurt? What if something's wrong?" "Something is wrong," Lisa nearly shouted. "People don't just vanish from moving cars. This whole thing is wrong." But we were already opening our doors, stepping out into the oppressive darkness of the forest. Jake grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam weak against the vast blackness surrounding us. The giggling continued, leading us away from the road and deeper into the trees. We stumbled over roots and rocks, branches catching at our clothes, scratching our skin. The air felt thick, heavy with moisture and the smell of decay. And then we saw it. A house. An old, dilapidated structure that loomed out of the darkness like some monstrous thing. It shouldn't have been there, in the middle of nowhere, with no driveway or access road. Yet there it was. Windows like dark, hollow eyes, the front door hanging slightly ajar. And in that doorway stood Emily. But she wasn't the same. Her white dress was now filthy, covered in dark stains that I could now see were definitely not mud. Her hair hung in tangled clumps around her face, which was smudged with dirt. And her eyes, they were exactly as I'd glimpsed earlier, completely black, like empty holes in her head. "Why did you leave me?" she asked, her voice distorted, as if several people were speaking at once. "I thought we were friends." None of us could speak. We stood frozen at the edge of a small clearing, the house before us, the dense forest behind. "Come inside," Emily said, stepping back from the doorway, gesturing for us to follow. "I want to show you something." I felt a pull toward her, toward the house, an almost physical tug that made me take a step forward without even meaning to. Mitch and Jake did the same. Only Lisa remained rooted to the spot. "Guys, don't," she pleaded, grabbing Jake's arm. "Please, let's go back to the car." But Jake shook her off, his eyes fixed on Emily, on the dark doorway behind her. "I want to see," he murmured, taking another step forward. "Yes," Emily hissed, her face splitting into a grin that was too wide, revealing teeth that were sharp and numerous. "Come see, come see." I took another step and another. I couldn't stop myself. It was like being in a trance, my body moving without my permission. I could hear Mitch breathing heavily beside me, could sense Jake just ahead. We were all being drawn in, puppets on invisible strings, and then Lisa screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut through the spell like a knife. She grabbed Jake's hand and yanked him backward with surprising strength. "Run!" she shrieked. "Now!" Something in her voice, in her fear, broke through to me. I blinked, suddenly aware of what was happening, of how close we'd come to entering that house. I reached out and grabbed Mitch's shoulder, pulling him back. "She's right," I gasped. "We need to go." Emily's face contorted with rage. "No!" she screamed, the sound inhuman, reverberating through the trees. "You're mine now!" She lunged forward, moving with a speed that wasn't possible, wasn't natural, but we were already turning, already running back the way we'd come, crashing through the underbrush, tripping and stumbling, but never stopping. Behind us, Emily's laughter followed, echoing from all directions at once, as if the forest itself was laughing at us. I could hear her moving through the trees, branches snapping, leaves rustling, always just behind us, just out of sight. We burst out of the tree line and saw the car, still sitting where we'd left it, doors open, headlights on. We piled in, Jake fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get them in the ignition. "Hurry!" Lisa sobbed. "Oh God, hurry!" The engine roared to life just as something hit the back of the car with enough force to rock it. Jake stomped on the gas and we shot forward, tires spinning in the gravel before finding purchase. I twisted around to look out the back window and immediately wished I hadn't. Emily was there, running after the car with that impossible speed, her black eyes fixed on mine, her mouth open in a silent scream. But it wasn't just her face anymore. It was shifting, changing, multiple faces seeming to overlay one another, all with those same black eyes, all reaching for us. And then we rounded a bend, and she was gone from view. Jake drove like a madman, the car bouncing and sliding on the rough road. None of us spoke. What was there to say? We were all trapped in our own private nightmares, replaying what we'd seen, what we'd almost done. It felt like hours before we found the main road again, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Jake turned right without hesitation, driving as fast as he dared in the opposite direction from where Emily had wanted us to go. We drove until we reached a gas station, bright fluorescent lights a beacon in the darkness. We stumbled inside, still shaking, and tried to explain to the bored-looking attendant what had happened. He stared at us like we were crazy, and maybe we were. He'd never heard of any abandoned house in the woods off Route 7. There was no turnoff where we described, and he certainly hadn't seen any girl in a white dress. We didn't stay at the coast that weekend. We drove straight home, making it back to our apartment by dawn. None of us slept for days afterward. When we finally talked about it, we couldn't agree on the details. Jake thought Emily's dress had been blue, not white. Mitch didn't remember her giving us her name. Lisa swore the house had been burning when we ran away. But we all remember the fear, the way she moved, those eyes, the pull we felt toward that house, like moths to a flame. I still can't drive on unfamiliar roads after dark. I can't look at hitchhikers without feeling sick. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I think I hear giggling outside my window, just at the edge of hearing, soft and inviting and terrifying. I don't know what Emily was. I don't know what would have happened if we'd gone into that house. I don't want to know. But I do know this. There are things out there, things waiting in the dark places between towns, at the forks in the road. Things wearing human faces, using human voices, but definitely, absolutely not human themselves, and they're hungry. Story 14. I still can't sleep without the lights on. It's been 3 weeks since that night on Highway 101, and I'm writing this down because I need someone to believe me. Maybe putting it into words will help me process what happened, though I doubt it. I keep seeing those shadows every time I close my eyes. It was supposed to be a simple drive. Just me, Nathan Reed, heading up to visit my cousin in Oregon for the weekend. I'd made the trip dozens of times before. Highway 101 is scenic, winding along the coast before cutting inland through Blackwood County. I always liked that stretch, the tall redwoods creating a natural tunnel, especially beautiful around sunset when the light filters through the branches. At least, I used to like it. That Friday afternoon started normally enough. I left work early around 3, threw my duffel bag in the trunk of my Honda and hit the road. Traffic was light and I was making good time. The radio played some indie rock station and I had a coffee in the cup holder. Normal stuff. I'd been driving for about 2 hours when I entered Blackwood County. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows across the highway. That's when I first noticed the motorcycle. A sleek black Kawasaki came roaring past me, going way too fast for the winding road. The rider wore all black leathers and a full-face helmet with a mirrored visor. I remember thinking, that idiot's going to get themselves killed as they disappeared around the bend ahead. About 10 minutes later, I came around a curve and saw the same motorcycle on the shoulder of the road. It was just sitting there, no rider in sight. The bike wasn't crashed or damaged, just parked at an odd angle, like someone had pulled over in a hurry and left. I slowed down, checking to see if the rider needed help. That's when something in my gut told me to keep driving. Have you ever had that feeling? Like some primal part of your brain is screaming at you that something isn't right? But my conscience won out. I couldn't just leave someone potentially hurt in the middle of nowhere as night was falling. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of the motorcycle and put on my hazards. The highway was deserted, no other cars in either direction. Just me, the abandoned bike, and the dense forest on both sides of the road. "Hello?" I called out, stepping toward the motorcycle. "Anyone need help?" No answer, just the sound of wind through the trees and distant birds. I checked the bike. The engine was still warm. Whoever had been riding it couldn't have gone far. I looked toward the tree line, wondering if they'd gone into the woods for some reason. That's when I saw her. A woman emerged from between the trees about 50 yards down the road. She stumbled onto the asphalt, one hand clutching her side. Even from that distance, I could see the dark stains on her riding gear. Blood. Her helmet was gone, revealing short blonde hair matted with dirt and more blood. "Hey!" I shouted, jogging toward her. "Are you okay?" When I reached her, she nearly collapsed into my arms, breathing hard and shaking. "We need to go," she gasped. "Right now, they're coming." "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to check her injuries. "What happened? Do you need an ambulance?" "No phones," she hissed, gripping my arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were wild with fear. "No stopping. We need to leave this place now." "You're hurt," I said. "Let me help." "They'll be here soon," she interrupted, looking back at the forest with genuine terror. "Please, your car. We need to go." Something in her voice got to me. Pure, unadulterated fear. I helped her to my Honda and got her into the passenger seat. She kept looking over her shoulder the entire time, scanning the tree line. "What about your bike?" I asked as I got behind the wheel. "Leave it," she said. "Just drive, fast." I pulled back onto the highway, watching her in my peripheral vision. Her breathing was ragged, and she kept checking the side mirror. "I'm Nathan," I said, trying to calm her down. "What's your name?" "Alexandra," she replied without looking at me. "And I'm sorry for involving you in this." "In what? What happened back there? Were you in an accident?" She laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "I wish it was just an accident." We drove in silence for a few minutes. The sun was almost gone. Now the forest growing darker by the minute. Alexandra seemed to get more tense as the light faded. "They hunt at night," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who does? Was someone chasing you? Should we call the police?" She turned to me then, her face pale in the dashboard lights. "The ghosts of the highway. That's what the locals call them. Spirits. Entities. Whatever they are, they're not human, not anymore." I almost pulled over right then. Great, I'd picked up some traumatized woman having a psychotic break. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the absolute conviction in her voice, or maybe it was the way the shadows in the rearview mirror seemed to be moving in ways that didn't match the passing trees. "You don't believe me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I believe something scared you," I replied carefully. "Tell me what happened." Alexandra took a deep breath. "I was just passing through, like you. I stopped to check my map around sunset. Just a quick stop. That's all it takes, lingering too long on this stretch after dark. I felt something watching me from the trees. Then I heard whispering, like dozens of voices all talking at once, but I couldn't make out the words." She shuddered, and I noticed the temperature in the car seemed to be dropping. I got back on my bike and rode, but they were already following. Shadows moving alongside me, keeping pace no matter how fast I went. Then my engine just died. No warning. I tried to restart it, but nothing. That's when they came out of the forest. "What did they look like?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. "Like people, but wrong. Shifting. Sometimes solid, sometimes like smoke." I ran into the woods, thinking I could lose them. But they were everywhere. One of them touched me. She pulled up the side of her jacket, revealing angry red marks that looked like severe frostbite. It burned cold. I barely got away. I was about to tell her we needed to get her to a hospital when my headlights illuminated a small gas station ahead, the only building I'd seen for miles. "We should stop there," I said. "Get you some first aid. Call for help." "No!" Alexandra grabbed my arm. "We can't stop. That's what they want. But it was too late. My engine sputtered and died, just like she'd described happening to her motorcycle. The car coasted to a stop about 100 yards from the gas station. "They've found us," Alexandra whispered. "They know you helped me." I tried the ignition repeatedly, but nothing happened, not even a click. My phone showed no signal. The temperature inside the car had dropped so much I could see our breath. "The station," I said, making a decision. "We make a run for it. There must be people there." Alexandra nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me. Don't stop for anything. Don't listen if you hear voices calling your name." We got out of the car and started running toward the gas station. The air felt heavy, like wading through invisible syrup. I swore I could hear something moving in the darkness behind us, but I didn't look back. The gas station appeared abandoned when we reached it. A single fluorescent light flickered over the empty pumps. The convenience store windows showed dim light inside. I pulled at the door, and thankfully, it opened. We stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. An old man behind the counter looked up from his magazine, startled. "We need help," I gasped. "Our car broke down." The man frowned. "Phone's out tonight. Storm coming." He pointed to the window where, sure enough, dark clouds were gathering, obscuring the moon. "Is there another way out of here?" Alexandra asked urgently. "Another road?" The old man studied her bloodied appearance. "You running from something, miss?" Before she could answer, the lights flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard the old man mutter, "Not again." A flashlight clicked on behind the counter, illuminating the man's weathered face. "You two brought them here," he said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. "Shouldn't have stopped on that stretch after dark." Outside, I could see strange movements in the darkness, shapes that weren't quite solid, drifting toward the gas station like fog with purpose. "What are they?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Folks who didn't make it off the highway," the old man replied. "Some say they were a cult that died in a mass suicide back in the 70s. Others say they're older than that. All I know is they take people, have for years." "How do we stop them?" Alexandra demanded. The old man laughed bitterly. "You don't, but they don't like the light. Dawn's your best bet, but that's hours away." As if responding to his words, the shadows pressed against the windows, darkening them further. The temperature plummeted. I could hear it now, the whispering. Countless voices speaking words I couldn't understand, but somehow I knew they were calling to me, promising things if I just opened the door. "We can't stay here," Alexandra said, grabbing a flashlight from a display and tossing me one. "They'll get in soon." The old man nodded. "There's a path out back, through the forest, leads to the highway on the other side of the hill. Maybe 3 miles. If you run, you might make it." "Come with us," I said. He shook his head. "They don't bother me much. Made my peace with them long ago. Besides, someone's got to be here for the next folks who stop." The whispers grew louder. Dark tendrils of shadow began seeping under the door. "Now!" Alexandra shouted, pulling me toward the back of the store. We burst through the rear exit into the forest. Our flashlights cut weak paths through the darkness, but they were enough to show the narrow trail. We ran, the sounds of pursuit all around us, branches snapping with no wind, whispers calling our names, shadows moving between trees. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but stopping meant death. I was certain of that now. Alexandra stayed just ahead of me, her breathing labored but determined. The shadows grew bolder, materializing across the path, forcing us to change direction. We were being herded, I realized with horror, led deeper into the forest, away from escape. Then Alexandra fell. Her flashlight tumbled away, the beam spinning crazily across the trees. I skidded to a stop beside her, pulling her up. "Leave me," she gasped. "You can still make it." "Not happening," I said, helping her to her feet. That's when we saw them clearly for the first time. Surrounding us in a loose circle were figures that looked almost human, but wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Some appeared solid, wearing old-fashioned clothes from different decades. Others were like living smoke, their features constantly shifting. All had the same empty, hungry eyes. They didn't approach, just watched us with those terrible eyes, the whispering growing to a deafening chorus. I raised my flashlight, but the beam seemed to pass right through them. Alexandra pressed against my back and I could feel her shaking. "They're toying with us," she whispered. "This is what they do." One figure stepped forward, a woman in what looked like clothes from the 1950s, her form more solid than the others. When she spoke, her voice sounded like dozens layered together. "Stay with us," she said, reaching out a pale hand. "All of us, together on the highway, forever." Something about her voice was hypnotic. I found myself wanting to take her hand, to join whatever existence they had. Alexandra's grip on my arm tightened, grounding me. "The moon," she hissed in my ear. "Look up." I glanced up and saw that the clouds had parted slightly, allowing a beam of moonlight to break through the canopy. It didn't touch us yet, but it was close. Understanding hit me. I grabbed Alexandra and lunged toward the moonlight. The shadows moved to intercept us, but we were faster, desperation giving us speed. We crashed into the patch of moonlight, and the effect was immediate. The figures recoiled, their forms becoming less distinct. The whispering turned to shrieks of frustration. "Run!" Alexandra shouted. We sprinted from one moonlit patch to another, the clouds above shifting constantly, creating a deadly game of light and shadow. The entities pursued, always just behind us, waiting for us to step back into darkness. Finally, we broke through the trees onto another stretch of highway. Headlights approached, a truck rumbling down the road. We waved frantically, and by some miracle it slowed. The shadows stayed at the edge of the forest, watching as we climbed into the cab of the confused trucker's rig. As we pulled away, I looked back to see them retreating into the trees, but not before one, the woman who had spoken, locked eyes with me through the window. I knew then what Alexandra told me next. "They'll never stop hunting us now. Once they've marked you, you're always theirs to find." The trucker dropped us at a motel 30 miles away. We were safe for the moment, but I haven't driven at night since then. Alexandra left the next morning without saying goodbye, but she wrote her number on a scrap of paper with a note. "If you see them again, call me immediately." I felt them watching me a few times since that night. Shadows at the corner of my vision, whispers just at the edge of hearing. They're patient, waiting for me to let my guard down, to drive that highway again after dark. So if you're ever on Highway 101 through Blackwood County, don't stop. Don't pull over no matter what you see, and whatever you do, be far away before the sun sets, because they're there in the gathering darkness, waiting, whispering, hungry, and now they know me by name. Story 15. I still can't sleep right after what happened last Thursday. I've been an officer for 8 years now, and I've seen plenty of messed up stuff, but nothing like this. I keep going over it in my head, trying to make sense of it. My wife thinks I should talk to someone, so I guess writing it down is a start. It was supposed to be a normal shift. I was patrolling the east side, which isn't the best area, but usually just means dealing with the usual stuff: shoplifting, public intoxication, occasional domestic. Around 10:30 at night, dispatch radioed in about a 911 hang-up from that old Westlake warehouse. You know, that massive brick building that's been abandoned for like 15 years since the manufacturing company went under. I wasn't far, maybe 5 minutes away, so I took the call. As I was driving over, dispatch couldn't get anyone back on the line. That happens sometimes, pocket dials, kids messing around, whatever. But something felt off from the start. I've driven past that warehouse hundreds of times. It's usually just a hangout for homeless people or teenagers looking to get high somewhere their parents won't find them. But it had been quiet lately since the city put up those new fences. Not that fences ever really keep people out. When I pulled up, it was dead silent. No cars in the lot except for a rusty blue pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. I called in my position and let dispatch know I was going to check it out. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about. But man, as I walked toward that building, something just felt wrong. The moon was nearly full, casting this weird bluish light over everything. The warehouse looked like a giant sleeping monster with its broken windows like jagged teeth. I'm not usually the jumpy type, but I found myself keeping my hand close to my holster. The main entrance had a padlock, but it had been cut. Fresh cut too, the metal still shiny where it had been snipped. That's when my heart started beating a little faster. Someone had definitely been here recently. I announced myself as I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking so loud it echoed through the whole place. "Police officer, anyone here?" My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dust particles floating in the air and old machinery covered in tarps. The smell hit me right away, that mix of mold, rust, and something else I couldn't place, something almost sweet but rotten at the same time. I followed protocol, methodically checking the entrance area before moving deeper inside. That's when I heard it, soft crying coming from somewhere ahead of me. A woman's voice. "Hello? Police officer here. Is someone there?" I called out, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. The crying got a little louder. I followed the sound, my flashlight sweeping across the floor littered with debris. Old papers, broken glass, empty beer cans. The beam caught something moving about 30 feet ahead, behind an old conveyor belt. When I got closer, I saw her, a young woman sitting on the floor, wrapped in this dirty grey blanket. She was maybe early 20s, with long dark hair partially hiding her face. She was shaking and crying. "Miss, are you okay?" I asked, crouching down a few feet away from her. You learn not to get too close right away. People can be unpredictable when they're distressed. She looked up at me, and I noticed right away how pale she was, like unnaturally pale. Her eyes were red from crying, but they looked, I don't know how to describe it, empty somehow. I think someone put something in my drink," she said, her voice shaky. "We were having a party and then everything went black." I asked her name and she told me it was Emily, no last name. I asked who she was with, where the party was, but her answers were vague. She just kept saying she felt sick and dizzy. I told her I was going to call for medical assistance, and she nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. I stepped back a few feet and reached for my radio to call dispatch. That's when I heard a rustling noise behind me, like someone walking through the debris. I turned around quickly, sweeping my flashlight in that direction, but saw nothing. When I turned back to Emily, she was gone. The blanket was still there on the ground, but she had vanished completely. There was no way she could have gotten past me without me seeing her. "Emily," I called out, my voice echoing. No response. Then I heard her voice again, coming from deeper within the warehouse. "Help me, please," she sounded terrified. I should have waited for backup. That's what protocol says. But I heard the fear in her voice, and if someone had drugged her like she said, she could be in real danger. So I followed the sound, moving past the old machinery and deeper into the building. The warehouse was like a maze. The main floor opened up into this massive space, filled with old assembly lines and storage areas. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The whole time I could hear Emily's voice calling for help, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It would sound close, then suddenly far away, then behind me, then ahead. I kept moving forward until I reached this large open area in the center of the warehouse. The ceiling was higher here, and moonlight filtered through broken skylights. Emily's cries suddenly stopped. "Emily?" I called out. "I'm here to help you. Where are you?" Nothing but silence. I decided to head back to the entrance and call for backup. As I retraced my steps, my radio crackled to life, making me jump. It was dispatch checking in. I reported finding a girl who appeared drugged but who had now disappeared. Dispatch said they were sending backup. I was almost at the entrance when I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck and a whisper right in my ear. "Help me." I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. There was nothing there, but something brushed against my arm like fingers trailing across my sleeve. Emily, I called again, my voice not as steady as I would have liked. The shadows in the corners of the warehouse seemed to be moving, closing in. I heard whispering all around me, not just Emily's voice now, but others too. Words I couldn't quite make out, like multiple conversations happening just beyond my hearing. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared, but I'm a police officer. Someone needed help. So I took a deep breath and moved back into the darkness of the warehouse. My flashlight beam caught something on the ground about 20 feet ahead, the same tattered blanket Emily had been wrapped in earlier. I approached it cautiously, my boots crunching on broken glass. That's when I saw a figure standing at the far end of the warehouse. It was just a silhouette, barely visible in the faint light coming through the broken windows. But I could tell it was her. Same long hair, same slight frame. "Emily, stay there. I'm coming to help you," I called out, moving quickly toward her. But as I got closer, something impossible happened. The figure, it just kind of faded like smoke dispersing in the air. By the time I reached the spot where she had been standing, there was nothing there, not a trace. I stood there, trying to process what I'd just seen, when my radio crackled again. Backup had arrived. When the other officers joined me, we searched the entire warehouse thoroughly. Every corner, every room, every possible hiding place. We found nothing. No Emily. No evidence anyone had been there at all, except for that blanket. Rodriguez, my backup, looked at me like I was losing it when I described what happened. "I get it. It sounds crazy, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That girl was there, and she needed help. We ran the 911 call. It had come from a cell phone with no registered owner. We checked hospital admissions, missing persons reports, everything. No Emily matching her description." As we were about to leave, Rodriguez pointed something out on one of the walls near where I first found her. It was a small engraving in the concrete. "Emily Westlake, 1987-2005. I went back the next day on my own time and did some research. Turns out the warehouse had been owned by Westlake Manufacturing, founded by Richard Westlake. His daughter Emily had died of an overdose at a party in that warehouse back when it was still operating. The official report said she'd been drugged without her knowledge. That was 18 years ago. I've tried to tell myself there's a logical explanation. Maybe it was someone playing a sick joke. Maybe I'm working too much and my mind is playing tricks on me. But I know what I experienced. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, it's what I felt in that warehouse. Like there were dozens of people around me that I couldn't see. Like Emily wasn't the only one trapped there. I still drive by that warehouse on my patrols. Sometimes I think I see a face watching me from one of the broken windows. Sometimes I hear my radio pick up a voice, whispering my name when I pass by. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if I'll ever understand it. But I know that Emily is still there, still asking for help, and there's nothing I can do for her. My captain suggested I take some time off. Maybe he's right. But how do you walk away when someone is calling for help? Even if that someone might not be. I don't even know how to finish that thought. All I know is that I responded to a call at an abandoned warehouse, and nothing has been the same since. I still hear her voice sometimes when I'm falling asleep, still feel that cold touch on my arm, still see her face fading away like smoke. Some calls you never really finish, some people you can never really save. Story 16. I've spent the last 3 weeks debating whether to post this. My hands are shaking even as I type. I know people might not believe me, but I need to get this out somewhere, even if it's just to strangers on the internet. This happened back in late September, just a few weeks ago. I'd taken a job in Prince Rupert after graduating from UBC this spring. My parents weren't thrilled about me moving up north, especially my mom, who kept sending me articles about the Highway of Tears. I thought she was just being overprotective like always. I'm not indigenous, I have my own car, I'm careful. I figured those warnings didn't really apply to me. God, I was so naive. I'd been making the drive between Prince Rupert and Prince George a few times to visit my boyfriend, who's still finishing his degree. The drive is long, like 7 hours without stops, but the scenery is absolutely breathtaking. Dense forests, mountains, rivers. During the day, it's gorgeous. At night, it's a different story. That day, I left Prince George around 3 in the afternoon. I'd stayed longer than planned because we'd gotten into a stupid fight the night before, and I wanted to make sure things were okay between us before I left. It was already starting to get dark earlier, but I figured I'd still make it back before it got too late. About 2 hours into my drive, somewhere past Burns Lake, I noticed my gas gauge was getting low. I couldn't remember the last gas station I'd passed, and my phone was showing that spotty no service message it always gets out there. I wasn't too worried yet. I still had about a quarter tank, and I knew there had to be a station coming up eventually. Another 30 minutes passed, and my anxiety started creeping up as the gauge dipped lower. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. I hadn't seen another car in at least 45 minutes. That's when I spotted a small sign for a gas station, supposedly just 5 kilometers ahead. I felt such relief. When I pulled in, the place looked off. It was just a single pump outside what looked like an old convenience store. The lights were on inside, but they were dim and flickering. There wasn't another car in sight. I sat in my car for a minute, debating whether to stop or push on and risk running out of gas in the middle of nowhere. The practical side of me won out. I pulled up to the pump and got out. The air felt heavy, like right before a storm. I could hear the wind moving through the trees surrounding the small clearing, but nothing else. No sounds of people, no distant traffic, just silence. I swiped my card, but the machine just blinked, "See attendant." Great. Walking to the store, I noticed faded missing persons posters taped to the window. Most were weathered beyond recognition, but a few newer ones showed young women's faces staring back at me. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The inside smelled like old coffee and something else I couldn't place. Something musty and unpleasant. Behind the counter stood an older man with a lined face and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. He was watching a small TV that was turned away from me, the blue light flickering across his face. "Pump's not taking my card," I said, trying to sound casual while fishing out some cash. He looked up slowly, like he was coming out of a trance. "Machine's temperamental. How much you need? Just fill it up, please. I've got a long drive ahead." He nodded, taking my money. "Where you headed?" "Prince Rupert," I answered, instantly regretting giving away that information. Something changed in his expression. "That's a long drive from here. You'll be on the road past midnight at this rate." I nodded, uncomfortable with his assessment. "I'll be fine." As he went to activate the pump, I glanced around the store. There were basic supplies, some snacks, and a wall of local papers. One headline caught my eye. "Another woman missing along Highway 16. The attendant returned, handing me my change. His fingers brushed against mine, lingering just a second too long. "You be careful out there. Highway gets mighty dark. Might be better to find somewhere to stay for the night." "Thanks, but I need to get back," I said, backing toward the door. "Suit yourself, but if you change your mind, there's a motel about 20 kilometers up. Can't miss it." He smiled, revealing stained teeth. "I get off in an hour. Could show you the way if you want." My skin crawled. "I'll be fine, thanks." Back at my car, I pumped the gas as quickly as possible, feeling his eyes on me through the window. As soon as the tank was full, I got in and locked the doors. That's when I noticed a truck parked around the side of the building that hadn't been there before, an old blue pickup with a dented fender. I pulled back onto the highway, relieved to be moving again. The sun had fully set now, and darkness pressed in from all sides. My headlights carved a tunnel through the night, but beyond their reach was just nothing. Complete blackness. After about 15 minutes, I checked my rearview mirror and noticed headlights in the distance behind me. At first, I was relieved to see another vehicle. The road had been so empty. But as I kept driving, I realized the headlights maintained the same distance. They weren't getting closer or falling behind, just following. I sped up slightly, and the headlights did too. I slowed down, and so did they. My heart started racing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just someone driving the same direction at the same speed. But something felt wrong. After another 10 minutes of this, I decided to test my theory. There was a small pull-out ahead, not quite a rest stop, just a widened shoulder. I signaled and pulled over, expecting the car to pass by. It didn't. The headlights slowed too, and then the vehicle pulled in behind me, stopping about 20 meters back. I could see now it was a pickup truck. My stomach dropped as I recognized the shape. It looked like the same blue truck from the gas station. I sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel. The truck's headlights stayed on, blinding me in the rearview mirror. I couldn't see if anyone was getting out. Panic rising, I made a split-second decision. I threw my car into drive and pulled back onto the highway, accelerating hard. The truck's engine roared behind me, and within seconds, its headlights were filling my mirrors again. I pushed my car faster than I'd ever driven before, taking curves at speeds that made my tires squeal. The truck kept pace effortlessly. I fumbled for my phone, but there was still no signal. I was completely alone out here with whoever was following me. Then I remembered the attendant mentioning a motel 20 kilometers ahead. People, witnesses, safety. I just needed to make it there. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor. For what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, this terrifying chase continued. The highway stretched endlessly before me, every curve and hill just revealing more empty road. The truck stayed behind me, sometimes dropping back, sometimes getting close enough that I could see the outline of the driver, a single silhouette. Finally, I spotted lights ahead, a small cluster of buildings set back from the highway. The motel. Relief flooded through me as I approached, but it was short-lived. As I slowed to make the turn, the truck suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside me. For the first time, I could see the driver clearly. It was him, the gas station attendant. His face was illuminated by my car's interior light, and he was smiling. Not a threatening smile, but something almost sad. He lifted his hand in what looked like a wave, then abruptly turned off onto a dirt road I hadn't even noticed, his taillights quickly disappearing into the trees. Shaking uncontrollably, I pulled into the motel parking lot. A middle-aged woman was working the front desk, looking surprised to see anyone. "Come in so late." When she saw my face, her expression changed to concern. "Are you all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed to stammer out something about being followed. She immediately locked the front door and called the RCMP. While we waited, she brought me tea and sat with me in the small lobby. "You're not the first, you know," she said quietly. "This highway, it has a reputation." The RCMP officer who arrived took my statement, but didn't seem particularly alarmed. He checked the area around the motel and said there was no sign of the blue truck. When I described the gas station, he looked confused. "There's no gas station where you're describing. Nearest one is back in Burns Lake or forward in Smithers." "But I was just there. I filled up my tank," I protested. He shook his head. "Maybe you're confused about the location. It happens on this highway. Everything starts to look the same after a while." But I wasn't confused. I know what I saw, what I experienced. The officer suggested I was just tired from driving and my imagination had gotten the better of me. He recommended I get some rest and continue my journey in the daylight. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the attendant's face in my car window. The next morning, I drove the rest of the way to Prince Rupert in broad daylight, scanning for the gas station on my return route. I never found it. It was like it had vanished completely. Since then, I've researched the Highway of Tears obsessively. The stories of all those women who disappeared haunt me. I've looked for reports of a gas station attendant or a blue truck in connection with any of the cases, but found nothing concrete. I don't know if what happened to me was a close call with someone dangerous or just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by my fear. But I do know that I'll never drive that highway alone again, and especially never at night. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for women who are alone and vulnerable on that endless stretch of road. And sometimes, in my darkest thoughts, I wonder if he was trying to warn me about something else, something even worse, lurking on the highway of tears. Story 17. I've never been able to talk about this experience until now. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night 8 months ago. I know how it sounds, but I swear every word of this is true. I work as an ER nurse at Maplewood General Hospital, about 20 minutes from my apartment. I was heading home around 2 in the morning after a brutal 16-hour shift. It was October, and we'd had this weird, foggy weather for days, the kind where the mist just hangs in the air, making everything look like it's underwater. That night was particularly bad. The fog was so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead of me. I was driving down Route 16, you know, that winding road that cuts through the woods outside of town. I was exhausted, fighting to keep my eyes open. I had the radio on low just to stay alert, but I was basically running on fumes at that point. I remember checking the time on my dashboard, 2:17 in the morning, when my headlights caught something by the side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer and I slowed down, but then I realized it was a person, a man waving his arms frantically. My first instinct was to keep driving. I'm not stupid. I've seen enough horror movies to know picking up strangers on deserted roads at night is how people get murdered. But something about the desperate look on his face made me stop. Plus, I guess the medical professional in me couldn't just drive past someone who might need help. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him and rolled my window down just a crack. The man came running up to my car. He was maybe in his mid-30s, wearing jeans and a dark blue sweater that was torn at the shoulder. His face was pale, almost gray in my headlights, and he had this wild, panicked look in his eyes. "Please," he said, breathing hard like he'd been running. "I need to get to the hospital. My car went off the road about a mile back, and my wife—" He stopped, choking up. "She's already at the hospital. I need to get to her. Please." I hesitated. He didn't look injured, just shaken up. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" No, I'm fine," he insisted. "But I need to get to my wife. She's pregnant, and there were complications. She was already on her way to the hospital when I was driving to meet her. Then my car—" He gestured vaguely behind him. "I've been trying to flag someone down for what feels like hours." I remember thinking it was strange that he wasn't calling anyone for help, but then again, cell service on that stretch of road was notoriously spotty, and maybe his phone was dead or lost in the accident. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the doors. "Get in. I just came from the hospital. I can take you back." Relief washed over his face. Thank you so much." He introduced himself as Daniel Cooper as he climbed into my passenger seat. I told him my name was Ryan. I noticed immediately how cold it got when he got in the car. I mean, it was chilly outside, sure, but the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees the second he sat down. I cranked up the heat. "So, your wife is already at Maplewood General?" I asked, pulling back onto the road. Daniel nodded, fidgeting with the seatbelt. "Yes, her name is Sarah Cooper. She's 7 months pregnant. There was bleeding earlier tonight, and her doctor told her to go straight to the hospital. I was following behind her, but I was stuck at work, so I left later." Something felt off about him. He kept looking around anxiously, his eyes darting from the road to the window to the dashboard clock. His hands wouldn't stop moving, twisting the wedding band on his finger, tapping his knee, clenching and unclenching his fists. "What department would she be in?" I asked. "I work in the ER, but if she's 7 months along, she'd probably be in maternity." "I don't know," he said, sounding frustrated. "I just need to get there. Can you drive faster, please?" I was already going 5 over the speed limit, which was all I was comfortable with given the fog and the winding road. But something in his voice made me press the accelerator a little harder. As we drove, Daniel got increasingly agitated. "It's getting late," he kept saying, checking the dashboard clock. "I need to be there by 3. I have to." "We'll be there in about 10 minutes, I assured him. "The hospital's not far." That's when things started getting weird. We were maybe halfway to the hospital when I saw something in the road ahead. A figure, small, like a child or a young woman, just standing there in the middle of the lane. I slammed on the brakes and swerved, nearly sending us into the ditch. "Jesus Christ!" I yelled as the car skidded to a stop. Daniel was pressed against the dashboard, staring through the windshield with wide eyes. "Did you see her?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A chill ran down my spine. "You saw her too?" He nodded slowly. "We have to go back. We have to check if she's okay." I hesitated. I hadn't gotten a good look at whoever was in the road, but it had definitely been a person. What if they were hurt? I made a 3-point turn and drove back to where I thought I'd seen the figure. There was nothing there, no person, not even footprints on the wet road. "I don't see anyone," I said, scanning the tree line with my high beams. Daniel was trembling now. "She was just here. I swear she was just here." He was breathing hard, almost hyperventilating. "We need to keep going. We need to get to the hospital, now." His panic was contagious. I felt my heart racing as I turned the car around again and continued toward the hospital. Daniel fell silent, staring straight ahead with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. The only sound was his ragged breathing and the rhythmic squeak of my windshield wipers pushing away the mist. We finally reached the hospital at 2:47. I pulled up to the emergency entrance, and before I could even put the car in park, Daniel was out the door. "Thank you," he called back to me. "I have to find Sarah." I sat there for a moment, trying to process the strange encounter. Something didn't add up. If his wife was in the maternity ward, why was he running into the ER? And if he'd really been in a car accident, shouldn't he at least get checked out? Curiosity got the better of me. I parked my car and followed him inside. The ER waiting room was unusually quiet that night. Just a couple of patients dozing in the plastic chairs and the night shift receptionist, Marlene, typing away at her computer. I spotted Daniel at the front desk, talking to her with increasing animation. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we don't have any patient by that name," Marlene was saying as I approached. "That's impossible," Daniel insisted. "Sarah Cooper, she would have been admitted tonight. She's pregnant. There were complications." Marlene gave him a sympathetic look. "I've checked our system, sir. We have no Sarah Cooper registered as a patient tonight. Maybe she's at St. Vincent's. That was the other hospital, about 30 miles away." "No, it has to be here," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Check again, please." I stepped forward. "Hey, Marlene, this is Daniel. I just gave him a ride here after he had a car accident on Route 16. Marlene looked at me with surprise. "Oh, Ryan, I thought you went home hours ago." "I was heading home, but I found him on the side of the road," I explained. "He said his wife was already here." "Sarah Cooper?" Marlene shook her head. "Like I told the gentleman, we don't have anyone by that name registered tonight." Daniel was getting more frantic. "She has to be here. Please, just check the maternity ward. She's 7 months pregnant with our first child." Marlene sighed but picked up the phone to call upstairs. After a brief conversation, she hung up and shook her head again. "I'm sorry, sir. No Sarah Cooper in maternity either." Daniel looked devastated. He turned away from the desk and paced the waiting room, running his hands through his hair. "This can't be happening. She has to be here." I followed him, concerned. "Daniel, maybe she went to St. Vincent's like Marlene suggested, or maybe she's still on her way." He shook his head violently. No, she would have called me. Something's wrong. Something's very wrong." That's when I noticed the bulletin board on the wall behind him. It was covered with community announcements, lost pet flyers, and a section dedicated to missing persons. And there, in the center of the board, was a face I recognized. It was a woman with long, dark hair and a warm smile. The poster read, "Missing Sarah Cooper, 32. Last seen October 12th, leaving her home in Maplewood, 7 months pregnant. If you have any information, please contact Maplewood Police." The date on the poster was from 2 weeks ago. I felt like the floor was tilting beneath me. I walked slowly to the board and stared at the photo. "Daniel," I said quietly, "is this your wife?" He turned and saw what I was looking at. For a moment he just stared at the poster, his face unreadable. Then he nodded. "That's her. That's Sarah." His voice was hollow, distant. "Daniel, it says she's been missing for 2 weeks." He didn't seem surprised by this information. Instead, he pressed his hand against the photo, his fingers trembling. "I've been looking for her," he whispered. "I've been trying to find her." And that's when another poster caught my eye. It was partially hidden behind a flyer for a blood drive, but I could see enough of it to make out another familiar face. I pulled the blood drive flyer aside, and my blood ran cold. "Local man dies in car accident on Route 16, the headline read, and below it was Daniel's face. The article stated that Daniel Cooper, 34, had died when his car went off the road during a foggy night 2 weeks ago, the same night his pregnant wife had gone missing. I turned to look at Daniel, but the words died in my throat. He was staring at me with the saddest expression I've ever seen on a person's face, and now, in the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital, I could see what I hadn't noticed in the darkness of my car. He was transparent, not completely, but enough that I could see the outline of the chairs behind him. "You didn't survive the accident, did you?" I whispered. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I think I knew. Deep down, I think I knew all along." His voice sounded different now, hollow, like it was coming from far away. "But I had to find Sarah. I have to know what happened to her." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. This wasn't possible. I was hallucinating from exhaustion or having some kind of breakdown. That had to be it. But then the lights in the waiting room began to flicker, and Daniel's form seemed to waver with them. "I remember now," he said, his voice growing fainter. "I was driving to meet Sarah at the hospital. There was someone in the road, a young woman. I swerved to avoid her and went off the road. I remember the impact, the pain, and then nothing until I was standing on the side of the road trying to flag down help." The lights flickered again, more violently this time. "I need to find Sarah," Daniel said, his form growing dimmer with each word. "I need to tell her I love her. Please, if you find her, tell her I never stopped looking." And then, between one blink and the next, he was gone. The lights stabilized, the room temperature returned to normal, and I was left standing alone in front of the bulletin board, staring at the face of a dead man. Marlene called out from the desk, "Ryan, are you okay? Who were you talking to?" I couldn't answer. Her. I just stood there shaking as the reality of what had just happened crashed over me. I had picked up a ghost on the side of the road. I had driven a dead man to the hospital, and somewhere out there, his pregnant wife was still missing. I've spent the last 8 months trying to make sense of that night. I've researched Daniel and Sarah Cooper, followed the investigation into her disappearance, even driven that stretch of Route 16 dozens of times, hoping to see Daniel again. Sarah's body was found 3 days after my encounter with Daniel, in a ravine not far from where his car had gone off the road. The investigation concluded that she had been driving to the hospital that night due to pregnancy complications and had likely lost control of her car in the same fog that claimed her husband's life. I still work at the hospital. I still drive that road home at night. And sometimes, when the fog is thick and the world is quiet, I swear I can see a figure standing by the roadside, waving desperately for someone to stop. But I never do. Some boundaries, once crossed, can never be uncrossed again. Story 18. I haven't told many people this story. It's been 15 years, and I still wake up some nights feeling like I'm drowning. My parents think therapy helped, but some things you just learn to live with. Some things you can't explain away with talk therapy and medication. I inherited my family's cabin on Hollow Pine Lake in northern Wisconsin back in 2007 when my father passed. It had been in our family since the 60s, and I have nothing but fond memories of summers there as a kid, fishing with my dad, swimming with my cousins, making s'mores while my mom told ghost stories that seemed harmless then. When my dad died, I hadn't been to the cabin in almost 10 years. Life got busy. College, marriage to Rebecca, the birth of my daughter Elise, her marriage to Mark, and then my granddaughters Abby and Maddie. The twins were 6 when I suggested we all spend a week at the cabin in June 2008. I thought it would be good for us to connect with our family history, to make new memories at the lake. The first 2 days were perfect. The cabin needed some work, but it was clean enough, and the girls were thrilled to have a lake as their backyard. We took the old rowboat out, fished off the dock, and grilled burgers on the deck overlooking the water. I remember feeling grateful that evening, watching the sunset with Rebecca while the girls played tag with their parents in the yard. On the 3rd day, everything changed. I was fixing a loose railing on the deck when I realized I couldn't hear Maddie anymore. Abby was helping Rebecca make lunch inside, but Maddie had been playing with her dolls on the grass just minutes before. I called her name, trying not to panic as I walked around the cabin. It was when I scanned the shoreline that I spotted her, standing waist deep in the water at a spot locals called the drop, where the lake bottom suddenly plunges from 4 feet to nearly 30. I ran so fast I lost a shoe. When I reached her, Maddie was staring intently at the dark water, completely still. I splashed in and grabbed her, probably rougher than I should have, but I was terrified. She didn't cry or fight me. She just looked confused, like I'd interrupted something important. "The lady in the water wanted me to play," she said as I carried her back to shore. "She said it's not fair that we get to live up here when she has to stay down there." My blood ran cold, but I forced a smile. "There's no lady in the water, sweetie. You know you're not supposed to go in the lake alone." "But she's there," Maddie insisted. "She has a house under the water, just like ours, but backward. She showed me. She has a little girl too. They want us to visit them." I told Elise what happened, and we agreed to keep a closer eye on the twins. That night, Rebecca found Maddie sleepwalking toward the back door. When she woke her, Maddie cried and said, "She's waiting for me." She said I promised. We locked all the doors that night and kept the girls in the room next to ours. I couldn't sleep, so I sat on the deck with a flashlight watching the lake. Around 3 in the morning, I swear I saw ripples moving toward our dock, even though there wasn't any wind. 2 nights later, we woke to both girls screaming. They shared the small room with the window facing the lake, and when we rushed in, they were huddled together in one bed, pointing at the window. "The water lady was looking at us," Abby sobbed. Her hair was all seaweedy, and her face was white and puffy. "She pressed her hands against the glass," Maddie added. "She's mad because we won't let her in." I checked outside with my flashlight but saw nothing. When I came back in, Rebecca was on her knees by the window, touching the floor. "Dan, there's water here," she said quietly. "The floor's soaked under the window." I checked the window. It was completely closed and locked from the inside. There was no way water could have come through, but the puddles were undeniable, and they smelled like lake water, not rain. The next morning, Mark found something on the dock that made us pack up immediately. At the very end of our dock, arranged in a perfect circle, were several items from inside our cabin. Abby's hairbrush, my car keys, Rebecca's reading glasses, Elise's wedding photo, and oddly, the deed to the property that I'd brought to show Elise. Every item was completely dry despite being outdoors, and none of us had any idea how they got there. We left that day. I told everyone it was because of unexpected work obligations, but we all knew the truth. Something wasn't right at Hollow Pine Lake. For 2 years, I couldn't bring myself to return to the cabin. I made excuses. It needed renovations. The winter had been hard on the property. The road needed clearing. In truth, I was afraid, not just of what might be in the lake, but of my own thoughts. I kept dreaming about a family living under the water, looking up at us through the surface like it was a ceiling. In 2010, I finally hired contractors to renovate the place, thinking maybe modernizing it would chase away the bad feelings. That's when things got even stranger. The workers were tearing out part of the old wood paneling in the main room when they found a hidden space behind the wall. Inside was a metal box containing artifacts from the 1930s, old coins, a faded photograph of a family standing in front of a different house that seemed to be in the exact same location as our cabin, and most disturbing, a leather-bound journal belonging to someone named Elizabeth Carver. I spent hours reading that journal. Elizabeth, her husband James, and their daughter Catherine had owned a homestead right where our cabin stood, long before the cabin was built. The final entries were frantic. The government was expanding the natural lake through damming to create a reservoir, and several properties would be submerged. The Carvers had refused to sell. James has nailed the window shut, one entry read. He says the water is rising already, faster than they claimed it would. Catherine keeps asking where we'll go when it reaches the door. I don't have the heart to tell her we have nowhere. This land is ours. We'll not be driven from it. According to official records I later found, the Carver family had died in a house fire in 1938. But the journal told a different story, one that ended abruptly with water stains blurring the ink on the final pages. I couldn't shake the connection between what Maddie had said about a backward house under the water and what I'd discovered. So I installed security cameras around the property, focused especially on the dock and shoreline. For weeks, nothing unusual appeared on the footage. Then, on a night with no wind and no rain, the camera caught wet footprints appearing on our dock, not walking from the shore to the end, but materializing simultaneously, as if someone had been standing there and suddenly became heavy enough to leave marks. The footprints included small ones, child-sized. I showed the footage to a historian at the local university, a woman named Meredith Alcott, who specialized in the region's history. She became fascinated and dug deeper into the records about the Carver family. What she found was disturbing: inconsistencies in the official story, missing death certificates, and newspaper articles that contradicted each other about how the family had died. Using some connections, she arranged for ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the lake near our property. The results confirmed what I'd started to suspect. Beneath about 20 feet of water lay the remnants of a foundation, nearly identical in dimension to our cabin. In 2013, I allowed a team of paranormal investigators to study the property. I'm not a superstitious person, but I needed answers. They set up equipment inside and outside the cabin, including underwater microphones in the lake. On their second night, all their equipment malfunctioned simultaneously for exactly 3 minutes. When it came back online, the underwater microphone had recorded a woman's voice saying clearly, "This is our home, above and below. The water took everything but our claim." One of their team members, Jason, went into some kind of trance while standing on our dock. When they managed to snap him out of it, he described vivid mental images of a house underwater, with a family sitting at a dining table, looking up expectantly, as if waiting for guests to arrive from above. The following morning, they found a perfect circle of dry sand on the dock, with tiny handprints pressed into it. After they left, I inspected the underside of our dock, something I'd never done before. There, embedded in the concrete supports, were small handprints that couldn't possibly have been made during construction. I tracked down the son of the man who built the dock in the 60s. He remembered his father sending him home early during the construction because he kept talking about a little girl swimming under the dock, watching us work and crying because we were building on top of her house. By 2017, I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Small items would disappear from the cabin and reappear days later, arranged in circles on the dock or floating in the shallows. The twins, now teenagers, refused to visit. Maddie had started having nightmares again, describing a girl her age asking her to come home to the water. That October, we held a small memorial service at the lake for Rebecca, who had passed from cancer earlier that year. As we scattered her ashes from the dock, something impossible happened. Hundreds of personal items, Toys, tools, books, clothing, all from the 1930s era, floated to the surface of the lake, rising from widely scattered locations across the water. Among them was a child's doll that looked exactly like one in the photograph of Catherine Carver. I sent an underwater drone down to examine the foundation Meredith had located. The footage it captured still haunts me. Not only was the Carver homestead's foundation clearly visible, but extending upward through the water was what appeared to be a complete shadowy structure, a perfect mirror image of our cabin, as if something was trying to rebuild itself in the depths. That was when I knew I couldn't keep the property. I had it demolished the following spring and donated the land to the county to be converted into a memorial park. I've never returned, but visitors frequently report the sensation of being watched from the water, particularly near where both cabins, one physical, one submerged, once stood as mirrors of each other. I live in Arizona now, as far from large bodies of water as I can manage. But sometimes when it rains hard and water pools against my bedroom window, I swear I can hear a soft knocking, like underwater knuckles asking to be let in. And on those nights, I remember what Maddie told me all those years ago about the family living beneath Hollow Pine Lake in a house just like ours but backward, waiting for us to join them.